little bit of rest or whatever you were craving for the holiday. I know it's hard during the holidays to get rest with the hecticness of everything. Simpsons had a good one. Not ever restful in our house at this stage of life, but joyful, full of joy, and it was really good. We have got a presentation for you today, just kind of in order, just so you know. We're going to kick it off with Charles Coffron. Dr. Coffron is going to be available on conference call. Dr. Coffron's the one who's been doing our enrollment projections. We're in our third series for that. And he is not going to go into a lengthy explanation of everything, but just kind of to set the stage, just share with you a little bit about how he comes up with his projections and then what the current data shows, and then give you an opportunity to ask Dr. Coffron any questions that you would like. Following that, I'll kind of set the stage for the presentations that will come. Bruce and I are going to tag team that, kind of going back and forth, starting with the Building Advisory Committee presentation, and then the presentation on enrollment space, and then close with the Finance Advisory report, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussions and questions. Although Bruce and I could be a little bit verbose from time to time, we've set a goal of approximately because you've gotten detailed reports from both of us, setting our time speaking to approximately 15 minutes. So we'll see. And we'll move on from there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ring. Any questions on that? The purpose, the end, what the ultimate goal is today is for us to certainly share our recommendations with you, answer any questions that you have, see if you have any additional questions, and then kind of get the board's feeling, is there a consensus on the direction that the board wants to go in terms of the recommendations. And then we are not recommending that we take any action on that recommendation until 14th, just being that, most of our meetings are on Mondays, they're public meetings and the such, just to have it all on the up and up. All right, I'm going to call Dr. Coffron. Chuck, it's John and the
I'm here.
Board of Education. How are you?
Good morning, and good morning to the board. I'm fine, thank you.
Good morning.
Good. Well, so Chuck, just setting the stage a little bit here. We have some board members that have, this will be the third time that they've received these projections. Some two, some one, and for some it's their first time that they've seen the projections. So I've kind of given an explanation to them about how you calculate it, but if you could just kind of, just briefly, just a brief something about yourself, how you calculate it, and then, what are you seeing in terms of enrollment growth in the Webster Grove School District, and then I'm certain that a few of them will have, questions related to the data. Does that sound good?
Sure be happy to, John. Let me put you on speaker on this side just to make sure everything's working. Here I go.
Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, sir. Can everybody hear him?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Okay, the projections that I've been doing for the last, I guess, it's going on 40 years, have been specific to resident students within school district boundaries. And by that I mean, what I do is I take the lowest common denominator of geography and I geocode student records to that geography in order to assure that the projections for elementary, middle schools, high schools, and the 6th grade center in Webster is consistent across all years. The data that I use are enrollments from at least the last 5 years. The enrollments are compared year by year, and cohort survival ratios are calculated simply by dividing year 1 by year minus 1. What we then do is take an average in 5 of the 6 projection series. We take an average of those cohort survival ratios using a weighted average, which produces a high, a mid, and a low projection series. One of the board members from Webster wanted to see what the average and what the projections would be if we averaged all 5 of the last year's cohort survival ratios. That is the 5th projection series. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to compare the last 2 succeeding enrollment periods only, which would be the current year and the previous year, develop a cohort survival ratio from a comparison of those 2, and then project out what those enrollments would be based on that comparison. We do this for all grades within each elementary attendance area. And each elementary attendance area, that piece of geography, the grades include not only K through 5, but also K through 12. The totals are rolled up for the 6th grade center from all 5 elementary attendance areas, and as well as the grade 7 and 8 for Hickson, and also 9 through 12 from for Webster Groves High School. So in doing these projections, it's based on geography, it's based on where students live in the district, and I believe maybe a previous year, maybe the first year, we did an administrative adjustment for VICC students. We've also done a special study on the number of kids coming into the district and then leaving. So there have been other special studies along the way that these enrollment projections and the questions from these enrollment projections have led to. I use enrollment, strictly speaking, from where kids live in the district. And again, the hardest thing to project would be the number of kindergartners that would be entering a school year 5 years down the road. And in order to do that, what we do is we take and we use live birth records. We geocode those to the same elementary school district boundaries, and then we compare those to the actual number of kids that entered for a previous cohort, the same way that we compare enrollments from one year to another. The difference, of course, is that we're comparing enrollments from 5 years down the road to 5-6 years down the road to the birth counts that we receive for any given year. The interesting thing about, I guess, this year's report is the tailing off of births in the last 2 years, which the 2022 data is final, and then the 2023 data is still preliminary. I only have a part of a year to work with in projecting births out. It would be the last 5 months or so of the calendar year that we receive births from the state for. So those numbers probably are going to change, as I've shown in 3 of the graphs that appear in the report. And that may be a little bit confusing, but I wanted to show those because, again, I was off only by a number of 12 or so in 2020-21. The number was more in 2022, where births, the actual number of births for the school district dipped, and it continued dipping in 2023. I think the main takeaway, though, is that enrollments are going to continue to increase in the district based on strong enrollment growth in the elementary grades prior to the 2023 projections. The upward slide, the upward trend line in total resident enrollments appears on page 5 of the report. And again, I'm projecting, even with the smaller kindergarten cohorts, that with the number of kids currently in the Webster Groves school system, that number is going to grow by about 90 or so, if my math's correct, a little bit more. So basically, that's kind of how I go about doing the projections. Once again, to summarize, the projection methodology is to geocode student records, to geocode birth records, and then to compare these counts within the elementary areas where students live by grade, and then roll these up to form 6th grade projections, 7th and 8th grade projections, and 9 through 12 projections by grade for the 6th grade
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
No, I said thank you.
Oh,
So-
okay.
so-
is
so-
that what you were looking for?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure there's some board members, board administrators, please feel free to ask any questions that you have of Dr. Kava. So,
So, Dr. Coughlin, this is David Addison. As you look,
Hello, Mr. Addison. Good to hear from you again.
yes, good to hear from you as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate the work you do every year on this. So, as you look at this and say you've spoken to, you've one full year and you've part of another year and you've seen a mini dip. I just wondered if that was something that if you had any sense as to how broad that was. So is that something, would you have any information to speak to whether that's something that's happening sort of in St. Louis County, that's something that's happening in Missouri? Is that something happening on a wider basis? I wonder if are there any inferences that you can draw beyond just what you've seen in for that little segment?
Excellent question, and I've been granted permission, and this is up to John. I don't know if I should bring this up at this point, but
well, you kind of already did, but it's not a secret. I mean, it's not a big deal. Go ahead.
okay. I reached out to other school districts that are using birth data to project kindergarten cohorts, and they've agreed to allow me to share that with the board for in-house administrative use only. And again, I trusted them with my word and my whatever I could put on the table to show Dr. Simpson the graphs from the other school districts that I'm currently working with. The one that sticks out to me in particular that looks a lot like Webster's is Kirkwood's. I sent a graph showing what the Kirkwood trend line looks like for births. One that doesn't look like Webster or Kirkwood is probably Duncan. Duncan, our 5-school district in Herculaneum, where they've experienced a increase, more than just a gradual increase, but a rather substantial increase in the number of kindergartners, but then the increase began to taper off just as quickly. And then I also provided, I believe, Hazelwood, which again has been kind of static and going down since with the collapse of the real estate market in 2008. But their numbers are gradually coming back. So just to David, as you probably well know, the larger the numbers we use to look at trends, the more variance is washed out from those numbers. And although that certainly can be gathered for the state and probably St. Louis County, which may be interesting in and of themselves, but I don't think very useful for projecting out what your cohort sizes are going to be. Is the decline a trend? I can't wait to get the 2018 numbers to tell you whether or not that's true or not. Just as the numbers have bounced back from declines that were projected from 5 months of data out, those numbers could turn around in the first 7 months of calendar year 2018 when that data becomes available. So, it's going to be interesting. I would like to say that over the last 2 years, there were more births occurring in Webster in the first 5 months of the academic year than there were the last 7 months, which has produced, first of all, an overstatement of projected births by me based on that limited data, and a recalculation of those births and where they're going. However, I would also like to add that with the finalization of the 2022 numbers, that's still I think John mentioned this in his summary, that's still one of the higher number of births that the district has experienced over
about 10 years.
14-year period. So I mean, it still is a larger number that certainly is reflected in, that will be reflected in the future sizes of your kindergarten classes. So I don't know if that helps. We can look at larger geographic areas, and again, a lot of the variance will wash out year to year. But for school districts and for making enrollment projections, these kind of are more. It's more heuristic just simply to use these as a rule of thumb.
Thank you.
Dr. Simpson, did you share the graphs with the board that I shared with you?
I didn't because I didn't know if I was supposed to.
Oh, okay. It's okay. That was something that I mentioned in that email, and if anybody's interested in that, they're more than welcome to take a look at that. But just keep it in the family.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And we do have media here, just so you know too. So that's why I didn't.
Okay.
Not just because of Jim, but just as an FYI.
You would be a couple thousand friends.
But I will share that information, and it's just as you described. So with your permission, and you think it's okay from those districts, I'll forward those on. It's just how you described it.
Right. So I think that I guess to honk my horn a little bit, the effort that's put behind these numbers, not only the effort by the district, but also the effort in getting the data and processing it in a consistent way across the district's elementary attendance areas, I think produces the best results and the best forecast of what your enrollments are going to be down the road. And again, my advice to school districts that are looking at these numbers every year is you want to continue the series, you want to keep it going, because these things the numbers will change. I mean, there's nothing more incorrect than to say that absolutely there are going to be 4,000 kids in West School District in 2023. That number can go up, it can go down, and 2023 is based on partial data that may change with the addition of 7 months of data coming in 2018.
Thank you. Other questions for Dr. Coffron? Dr. Stricker?
Dr. Coffron, Arnold Stricker here. On your projections for your 5 years, did you say that you used the 2 years past, or could you clarify that again?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Could we? It didn't come across the question.
Yeah, on your 5-year projection, I think I heard you say you used the 2 years past to project out. Is that correct or no?
The 5-year projections are based on the 5th year of the projection is based on your current enrollments going through the system and kindergartners that are projected from 5 months of birth data. The district receives, and the state of Missouri does not assign cohort information to those addresses that are geocoded. We do. So for the 2023 school year, I'm using only 5 months of data, and I'm just simply adding, based on the rate of, or the number of births in those 5 months, I'm adding a number of births that would be expected, given that same rate, over the next 7 months. That 7 months of data won't be available until the 2018 birth data is reviewed, finalized, and made available in the June-July timeframe of 2019. So we're working with incomplete data for 2023, but again, I would hate to just simply throw away the 2023, the 5 months of data that are used to project that kindergarten cohort, and only say that the 2022 numbers are the final numbers that I have to work with. Also, all of your all of your enrollments have been updated for 2018 based on resident student location. So they're, depending upon kids moving in, moving out, the fall September 30 numbers are what we use to assemble the cohorts for each of the grades and to compare those grades to previous numbers that were developed. So everything is once again based on your enrollment for 2018. The only projection that I'm making of anticipated data, let's put it that way, would be for births that will occur and that occurred between January 1 of 2018 and July 31 of 2018, and those counts will be available when the state gets done processing the data again in June, July 2019. Does that get the question? Does that answer it?
Some semblance.
Yeah. So
I understand where you're coming from with
we have a
that.
great deal of confidence in the data for grades 1 through 12, but the partial year data that's used to project out what a final birth count will be for 2023 is still in the offing.
So how do you get your 2024?
I did.
Are
No,
you
your
talking about
23-24 projection.
The 2023 projection is based on, we start with 5 months of birth data. We add to that what 7 months of birth data would be given that 5 months, basically multiplying the 5 months by 2.4 or 12 divided by 5. Starting with that number and then using the cohort survival ratios, okay, multiplying the cohort survival ratio, the high, the mid, the low, the 5-year average, and also the snapshot, which is a comparison of the last two succeeding years of kindergarten enrollments. We take that and we multiply that times the births to get a kindergarten projection for 2023. We take then the same data, the cohort survivals for kindergarten to first, and multiply the kindergarten number by that to get a first grade projection, and so on.
But, so Arnold, I mean, is that your question, or is your question if we now project a year to births that haven't actually occurred?
Correct.
How would we, yeah.
I'm looking at your last column, 2023-2024 school year.
Yes.
That's how you did that.
So that's based on 5 months, and you ratio it up based on,
Yeah,
but taking
starting
into
point
account
for
the
that
way
is
that.
based on the 5 months of it ratioed out, exactly.
Okay.
But then the projections for grades 1 through for K through 12 are made based on the last 5 cohort survival projections that were made for each of the made based on 2018 enrollments, 2017, 2016, 2015, back to 2014.
That's what I wanted to know. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And again, it's done in different ways. The high, low, and the mid is a weighted average of the top 3, the highest 3, the mid 3, and the low 3 CSRs, and then there is the 5-year average, which takes the CSRs from all 5 years and averages those. And then what I like to do is, and this appears as a purple line in the graphs that are up here in my report. It kind of shows, based on last year's enrollments compared to this year's enrollments, what the trend line looks like and how the enrollments are either pulling down or pushing up the final average enrollments for in the projection window. So the snapshot projection is good for judging exactly where or how the enrollments from 2018 compared to 2017 are taking the enrollment series. The averages are based on, again, the high, low, mid, and then the 5-year average averaging of those core survival ratios.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Coffron?
I have a quick question. Dr. Coffman, Steve Lohr here. Just to, since the numbers thing kind of comes in and out of my world on a daily basis, I appreciate your explanation of kind of, and I use the term annualizing your 5 months numbers to over 12. I'm wondering, did you see, and maybe you didn't even look at it this way, but the trends of the final 7 months versus the first 5 months, did you see anything year over year that would essentially make those projections, is it easier to do the 12/5, or is it easier to say the last 7 months tend to be higher or lower than the first 5, so I'm going to adjust my last 7 month projecting more based on that? Did you see any trends of the last 7 versus the first 5 in any stretch of years?
Well, you know, that's a very interesting question, and the answer is yes. However, it really varies by school district. As I talked with Dr. Simpson about, I've been doing this for some time. I really, and the reason why we use birth data is that it does vary. As I mentioned, your trend line in Kirkwood looks the same, where it seems in the past 2 years, in processing births, in the same way, by the way, that the number of births in the first 7 months were not as high as the number of births in the first 5 months of an academic year, of that academic year. So, and really, in some districts, it's the exact opposite. The first 5 months are really slow, birth-wise, and the balance of it, the balance of the school year picks up in January. And the explanation, is it due to the economy, housing, moving in and out? It's probably due to all those things.
Yeah, I thought I'd picked that up earlier from you, and that's why I asked the follow-up question, because I thought you had mentioned that there were some differences in the last 7 versus the first 5, but I appreciate your clarification that it can be different from district to district. Thank you.
Yeah, it's worthwhile taking a look at, and that's why I did share the profiles from those other districts with you, because again, they're quite a bit different. And if you know the dynamics of, well, I'm sure you're probably aware of the dynamics of Kirkwood, and maybe have paid attention to what's going on in Hazelwood a little bit. Maybe not so much Herculaneum and Peabody since the lead mine closed, but you know, there's some interesting stories behind those trend lines, and the people that are moving in, having babies in the district, and then those babies going on to attend school in the district. So I would also, there's a lot to be, some interesting trends to be looked at if you take a look at the back of the report in the section where I compared kindergarten and births for each of the elementary attendance areas. This appears, I'm scrolling to it right now. Beginning on page beginning on page 39 with Avery. I plot out the total enrollment projections for each school, along with the resident births, and what I'm projecting the numbers to be based on those births. The red bar indicates the last year for which we have actual data, and the lines and the numbers to the right of that bar indicate projections.
Yeah, and they've all received a copy of this too.
So, yeah, I think there were a couple of things that stood out. One was just looking at Clark. attendance area to attendance area is different. I mean, that's how interesting this is. Clark enrollments went down between 2017 and 2018, but their births went up. I wouldn't expect that, but empirically, that in fact is what happened. So, Edgar Road, in contrast, in graph 31, births went up, and so did kindergarten enrollments. And then I mentioned the big gap in the line for Hudson. Most of the trend lines are very, very close to the actual number of births, but the trend line for Hudson is somewhat they're not as tight. Whereas births went up in Hudson between 2017 and 18, but yet enrollments, kindergarten enrollments went down. So, behind even the elementary attendance areas, there are some differences. And I just also wanted to point out the kernel density maps, which show concentrations of births for the 2022 kindergarten data that was processed, and then the 2023 data that appears on pages 47, 48. So that kind of gives you an idea of where the bright spots, hot spots are for births in the district.
Anything else for Dr. Coffron before we let him go? Chuck, thanks for giving up some time on a Saturday morning. I appreciate it.
Well, John and the board, you're letting me off easy, and I appreciate that. I'm happy to provide this information, and again, if there's any interest, I do have permission to share that with the board for the board's use only from the other districts.
I will forward those graphs on to them after our meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, and thank you to the board. Thanks for the time. I always enjoy talking about it.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Bye now.
So Charles does a great job. The folks at Cooperative Strategies, when they heard what Charles charges us, were like, oh my gosh, you get him for a steal. Scott kind of hit Karen as soon as she said that, because they do that to that same work. And so I do just kind of want to just speak to just reminding us that, as we sit today, we're crowded. We're not. So while we do have growth coming in the future, there does seem to be some things that we'll continue to monitor 5 years out, but we're not necessarily planning for the future. We're always planning for the future, but it's also we're dealing with present needs. And so let's just want to set that reminder. So I'm going to kind of introduce the presentations, and then we'll move forward. And I wrote down some things to try and be as concise as possible, but thought it would be good just setting the stage of who we are as a school system and both who we aspire to be as we kind of think through some of these things and some of the decisions. First of all, starting with our vision statement, which we crafted a few years back, that really speaks to our desire, and I think we were forward thinking as a school system, I think we still are, to really help kids discover who they are and what they're uniquely suited to do and be in this world, and to equip them with all the academics, the social skills, the soft skills, and the beliefs in themselves to leave our system and thrive in wherever they go, whether that's a trade, whether that's a job, whether that's a 4 or 2 year institution. That's kind of what our charge is. Our mission statement that's been around a little bit longer, which speaks to the day-to-day aspects, speaks to our attention to each child. And creating a system that benefits each child, both academically as well as personally. Again, we're an academic institution. We're education. We have a responsibility to the education, the academic education that's critically important. But this district for some time has also placed a priority on the social, emotional, and physical development of kids as well. So our work that we look to do across the system, from our youngest in our preschools through our 18th, we look to align with that mission and vision in all we do, so that they leave our system ready to thrive, ready to be happy, and ready to live healthy lives. Our district has always been committed, or I shouldn't say always, but for a number of years, at least since I've been in the district, some of you have been here longer, to equity and to be responsive to gaps in performance that show up, participation, gaps in opportunities in a lot of different ways. And I applaud the board that was in place in 2017 for adopting the resolution. Now, we were the second district to do that. Maplewood had done something first. You guys, those that were here, followed suit. And while I think for the people that were on that board, it probably wasn't bold or probably wasn't risky to you as a system, it was bold. And you received, and the district received, some attention for that. But as some of you have commented, you could have goals, you could have resolutions, but unless it translates to what Dr. Starsky-Wilson says, equity, which he says outcomes. So when Dr., and we shared this part with you, the board, his presentation to staff is diversity is who's in the room, inclusion is who gets heard, and equity are outcomes. And so I think last year, Chris and I and Sandy and different folks, with that resolution, also spoke to some of the things that we're looking to do, not just from an interaction between a child and to a teacher to support equity, but also looking at equity on a structural and a systems level. Because that's where the change is going to occur, because systems and structures are designed to benefit, have always been designed to benefit certain people. And so we feel it was our responsibility in looking at curriculum and looking at the people in front of our kids and looking at how we spend our money and all these kind of things, we have to look at it through that particular lens of who's benefiting, who's designed to benefit, and how might they benefit if we did something to that particular system. That's a work in process. We're still fully imperfect with that, fully flawed with that, but I applaud our commitment, our honesty about our imperfections, and our work forwards. To accomplish kind of our work and our vision, it's also key, a priority, a long-standing priority for the district has been fiscal responsibility. Because you need the finance, you need the resources in order to accomplish what your ultimate goal is, and that's to help kids learn and thrive. And I really feel like, again, the district's been committed to that for some time. And I think Bruce has highlighted time and time again, and I think you've recognized it, that our district is in an incredibly strong fiscal shape right now. Huge due to Bruce, huge due to Joanne, the people in their office. We've had some good fortune. We've had things that have changed at the state level with funding. The full-day kindergarten was a huge find. Our total tax rate now, and I look at St. Louis County School Districts, and when you look at the total, the combined of operating and debt service is ninth in St. Louis County. And not too long ago, it was Webster's going to be number one, or Webster is number one. To be in the middle of the pack, we know the burden, and a lot of us live here in the school system. We know that our taxes are high, and so it's important for us to be responsible, to be mindful of that, and also think through the quality of education that we give, and how do we maintain or even improve upon where we sit with respect to other St. Louis County school districts. So we have to be mindful of that. So that's kind of what we strive for with our kids. That's the finance piece. As you know, over the past year, we've done quite a lot of work. And there's been plenty of work done by plenty of people before then. But we've done a lot to look at space, and we've done a lot to look at safety and some other things. You've kind of received updates along the way. Today, what Bruce and I aren't going to do are not going to go over and read you've read our reports. You've gotten updates on process. So we're going to kind of hit on some really key points, some summaries, our recommendations. We know that you'll have questions and comments, and a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion. That's why we're here today. What we're hoping, what we're asking of you with respect is that if you would let us to get through our presentations, again, our goal is 15 minutes, try to be even more efficient, but thorough. Ask clarifying questions along the way, but then kind of save your questions along the end, because we think that maybe as we go, your questions might be answered. And that's kind of what our plan is. Does that sound reasonable? And we've got all the time in the world when we're finished. Okay. All right, Bruce is going to kick it off with the report from the Building Advisory Committee and their work. Any manipulatives we need to pass out, gifts or anything?
Not this time.
Yeah, where's our souvenir?
I am fresh from Hawaii again, and
Oh, good.
unfortunately,
Just rub it in.
No full-size surfboards over here.
no.
I've got my Barbie-size one. But
You don't, people can see it over you. You can see it over you. It doesn't have on the lights on. Hey, John, can you try and touch that TV to see if it comes on? Your magic.
So how do you displace them?
Do it again, dude. Click again.
Click this again?
I think it's on the other side, actually, John. Yeah, click your,
So that's not my screen. Click it again.
double click. Do it one more time. You know what? Let me just click out. Now you try. There you go.
that's what I ended up with a regular.
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry.
You all had coffee.
Is there water?
No. There's no doctor.
There was water on the table.
That's all right, John. Everyone's adjusted.
Oh, you're fine.
So I wanted to start out this morning with a report from the district's Building Advisory Committee, who has been an invaluable resource during this process. They're a group of resident, facility, and building experts, includes a couple of liaisons from the board here, but more than that, community residents and parents who have the education and experience in buildings and facilities, construction, maintenance, operations that serve as advisors to the board. And they were not a group that was just pulled together for this purpose. They're a group that has been in place for years, that meets monthly during the school year, generally monthly during the school year, to keep tabs on and advise the district on various building and facility issues that come up each year. And so they were experienced in terms of knowing what the district's challenges were. They were, almost all of them on the Building Advisory Committee was here about a year ago when we went through the comprehensive facilities assessment and looking at every building and what the anticipated future needs and timing of those needs would be. So very familiar with the configuration, the structure of the district and the buildings in the district. What we wanted to do in this particular case was take a comprehensive look at all district needs, not just in terms of keeping up with the aging infrastructure in the district, but what were the other needs in the district related to safety and security, for instance, accessibility. There had been a study done in the past regarding the accessibility of our buildings, and had been recommendations made that would make all of the district's buildings fully accessible. The district had made some progress on those, but there was a lot of work remaining to be done, so we took a look at that. We took a look at the health aspects of the buildings. The district has asbestos in the buildings. We have an asbestos management plan. All school districts and institutions with buildings the age of those in Webster have asbestos in them. In most cases, it is contained and therefore is just subject to a management plan to make sure that it stays contained. But as work gets done and as things age, we constantly revisit that to see if it needs to be, if any additional work needs to be done to abate that, remove it, contain it, that kind of thing. So we revisited that plan as well. We met with the building administrators to determine what program needs that they had. How was the space in their buildings either meeting or not meeting their current needs and program needs. And then, of course, we had the document from the facilities, comprehensive facilities assessment that was done about a year ago, as well in terms of what needed to be done just to keep up with our current buildings and keep them in serviceable condition. So we looked at all of those aspects, and we knew kind of coming up that there was also going to be some recommendations for new space related to enrollment growth and just catching up with how enrollment and the space constraints have played out in the buildings already, because this isn't just about space for anticipated growth in enrollment. Our buildings have been squeezed for a number of years, and in the report that you received, you can see where some activities and services are being provided in less than ideal circumstances. So we taking a look at, knowing that we would be taking a look at trying to catch up and providing more appropriate space for those. So what we knew was there was going to be a lot of needs from various different areas that were going to be hard to compare a priority of an accessibility project with the priority of a safety project, with a program need, with the new space need. How are we going to take those very different needs and translate them into some kind of, put them on a level playing field and be able to compare the priority of one against the other in a more comprehensive manner. And so what the Building Advisory Committee decided was that it would be very important to have some kind of a common rubric to be able to compare all of those on. And so what we developed was what we called a facilities weighted condition index that took a look at every need in the district and evaluated it through this common rubric based on various dimensions of that project. And we identified 5 of those: a safety, health aspect, potential education impact, the condition of the existing space that was related to that item, what the life cycle expectancy, or if there was an efficiency aspect to it, would it improve the district's efficiency and therefore have somewhat of a payback in terms of investment, and then what it would do and how it would rank in terms of public support, in terms of aesthetics, those kinds of things. And each one of those were given a weighting. Safety items was given a weighting of 5. So safety was a bigger element in the weighting than what efficiency was or what the aesthetics of a particular project might be. Educational impact was a weighting of 4. Condition of the current condition, a weighting of 3, and so forth. And then each one of those aspects, when we looked at a problem or a project, was given a score then of 0, 1, 2, or 3, depending on what the magnitude of that particular aspect how it related to that project. So something that was a safety program that would have a major impact on improving safety in the district would be given a higher score of 3. Something that would be nice to do but wasn't really required or necessary would be given a lower score, and then the score would be multiplied times the weighting factor to get what that dimension total score was. So if the safety scored at 2, that would be multiplied by 5 to give a total score of 10, and then for each item, though, that multiplication would be done in order then to add up to a total score, and then that total score, that composite score, is the facility weighted condition index. That's the score that then could be compared to projects across the areas, and it becomes just comparing the composite score. That wouldn't be the be-all, end-all. It would be the beginning point of that in terms of trying to establish relative priorities in the district. But we also surveyed the community during that process to determine what the community felt were priorities in the district. And one of the things that we found when all that information came in was there was a great deal of consistency between the rubric scoring and what the community's priorities were for these projects. So we were very pleased with that, and that was really shown when we developed the comprehensive list in the green shaded area here. So in the green area here, we show the total average score. This is the rubric score. So for the maintenance tunnel crawl space ability, we have asbestos in some of the maintenance areas of the district. And so when the building advisory committee went through the rubric and developed a composite facilities weighted index score, that was a 37.6, the highest rated individual need in the district, while the survey score scored it also very high at a 3.96. In fact, when these projects, all of the different projects in the district were listed, and that's what this represents here, starting from some of that to exterior door replacement and securing those from a safety aspect, elevators and stair lifts from accessibility, and you can see there's all kinds of needs here that represent safety and security, accessibility, health, the abatement, the program needs, and then the maintenance of what our existing facilities were. And each one of those were given an estimated cost as well, but that cost factor, if you remember the rubric, the cost was not a consideration in the scoring from the rubric standpoint. Each project, based on its own merit, was given a score irrespective of what the cost was. And so that's also where some of the judgment comes in. It's like we get this initial score, but then we have to look at the cost and whether that's going to be affordable, if there's other ways to approach that particular need, that kind of thing. And so when we looked at what the rubric score was and the survey score, we lined those up, and when we shaded them, we took a cutoff score of 3.9 from the survey and a cutoff score of 30 from the rubric, and then we highlighted everything that scored at or above that threshold, and then put them on the sheet, and you can see that there was a great deal of alignment between those, that all of the highest rated survey priorities were also very highly rated on the rubric. And we went through the rubric process and that scoring process before the community was surveyed, so that had already been done, and so we didn't have the benefit of knowing what the survey score was when we were going through the rubric scoring, so they were done independently. There were
This is sorted by total average though, right?
This is sorted by total average, the total score. So there were a few items on the survey that ranked above that. For instance, the lead testing of drinking water. That wasn't something that was identified as a project need during our process, so there wasn't a rubric score for it. And that's actually something that's not really a capital project. It's lead testing of the water. That's something that we've actually done periodically anyway. The district has so far not had issues with that. We've always been within the allowed parameters on that. So that's something that can be done through continuing operations. We've already been just monitoring that every couple of years, doing the testing on the drinking water for that kind of thing. So there was that. Let's see, also the intruder alert alarms is not really necessarily a construction project. That's also something that can kind of be looked at operationally. So there were 2 or 3 of the survey scored items that were above the cutoff, but not on the survey, but not on the rubric. But those were all can all be taken care of through just the normal operation. So we felt like for the items that were capital items, there was really good alignment between the survey and the average. The other reason that we needed a rubric and some kind of a prioritized list was the amount of funding was not known. And so to have some kind of a priority and have a scalable list that the funding line could float up or down depending on how much money was needed for the space solution or how much money would be available otherwise, and that not just for the purposes of talking about the bond issue here, but all of these costs are estimates. And so whether we talk about the cost estimates for additional space or the cost amounts for these additional projects, as those come in higher, the actual costs come in a little bit higher or lower than what those estimates are, the list can float, and we can do maybe a few more projects if our estimates turn out to be, as they usually are, conservative, and we can bring projects in a little below that. Then we can take that extra money, and we already have what additional projects then would be done with that extra money. Or if the project cost comes in higher than expected because of some unforeseen site circumstance, that's utility that has to be relocated or something that we didn't even know was there, then we can also, we know which project was on the bubble that wouldn't be funded in order to provide the funding to take care of that contingency. And so having that scalability and the ability to move that line a little bit, not just as we make recommendations for option A or option B from a space standpoint, but as the actual work begins to be done in the future, that can be scalable as well. The cost estimates were put together from our facilities department. Matt Palmer, the director of facilities, and Rob Stuber put those together. Many of those we already had cost estimates, for instance, on the accessibility when that report was done a couple of years ago to identify what projects would be necessary to make our buildings fully accessible. Those cost estimates were made by the person doing that study in the first place, that architect and designer. For the safety improvements where we're talking about things like secure vestibules, then our facilities department went to each individual site, looked at the entryway, and evaluated what work would be necessary to create a sort of a secure vestibule with double set of doors and so forth, and made some good cost estimates for that. But one of the things that we also wanted to do was verify the cost estimates that were made for the space options. When we look at option A and option B, there would involve additions to either the elementary schools or to the middle school. We made estimates of that, but that was just kind of based on how many square feet we thought would be added, and then kind of what a standard cost per square foot for construction would be. And we wanted to be a little more, do our due diligence on that and have a higher degree of confidence in what those estimates were. So we engaged a resource here actually in the district, Dickinson Hussman. I think they were involved in the high school addition, so they're familiar with our buildings as well. And they came in and helped us actually develop a conceptual site plan to identify exactly where the additions would be, at least initially the plan would be for them to be located, talked to the principals, worked with the principals in terms of the classroom layouts and those kinds of things, and then ran cost estimates. So they're based on not just some general industry standard and some assumption on per square foot, but there's actually been a conceptual site plan done that lays out where the addition would be and about what size it would be, and then develop a cost from there. And we were pleased that our initial cost estimates were in alignment with what with the more conceptual plan was when we brought in that resource. So we have a good degree of confidence in the numbers that we're looking at for these projects, both on the space side when we look at those later, as well as these other projects. So when we look at this, as I said, it's scalable. So I believe come up here. There's one of these that wasn't needed under option A, the addition of the portable, the additional modular. If the district adds space to the elementary schools, we wouldn't need to add that modular because of the timing of that project and the timing of when the enrollment increases are. But the under option B, the funding line would be basically drawn here, and all of these priorities would be funded down to this line. Under option A, because of the difference in the cost of the space, we would be able to fund all the projects down to this. So that demonstrates what the scalability of this list is, and that was important. And the Building Advisory Committee was just, invaluable in developing that and in helping to score all of the projects and guide the district through that. That's in terms of the projects that would be identified, the process that went through, that had been gone through to make sure that the information out there was relevant to all of the needs that were out there, compared on some common basis. This is all the work that was being done in the background. I'd be happy to try to respond to any questions at this point, or turn it back over to Dr. Simpson to move forward.
Just to stick with our process, any clarifying questions for Bruce? Okay. We'll come back to it. I just have a few slides, and I'm going to primarily speak to you. Can you turn yours off? So I think just again go some of the language that Bruce used, is that the focus of our work has really been on what do we need? If we can go beyond that and benefit in other ways to improve the education of our kids, the safety of our kids, well then we'll do that. But our focus from the onset has been on needs. The enrollment space work started, moved forward in August with the approval of cooperative strategies, following that RFP process. From the onset, we really tried to be mindful of the board's direction of, don't take anything off the table. We certainly weren't starting with any kind of end in mind. Think about fiscal responsibility and think about what's good for kids. We prioritized community engagement and involvement as part of the process. And I feel like we accomplished that quite a bit. I've received, I know some of you have, numerous compliments, accolades from people saying, we appreciate that you've involved us all along the way. There's also been expressions of trust, knowing that it's our responsibility ultimately. We said from the beginning, this isn't going to be a community vote on where we go, but you don't want to be out of step with where your community is. So we've reached a lot of people. When I went back and looked back at past processes, our reach definitely extended beyond a number of past efforts for like-type activities. Similarly to the past, we did struggle to get people who were not directly affiliated with the system to participate in surveys. Some of you saw my response to one local patron who made that comment, and we sent we were in the Webster Kirkwood Times, which remains the preferred source of information from our community. They tell us that time and time again. When I look back to records from the 90s, it was the same thing. So we were always involved advertising then. We had a lot of surveys. We had face-to-face. I would send to private schools different opportunities, encourage them to put something in their newsletters or in their blasts related to this. And I know from at least one school, they did receive something. Also had reached out to different churches, again, trying to just extend our reach and involvement. So with that still, the number of people that we had not directly affiliated, private school parents, seniors, was relatively low. But I did have a number of them, including one in particular who said, essentially I shouldn't expect anything less. And that, yeah, we'll have opinions certainly when it comes to, you know, what you're doing and how it's going to affect us financially, but whether you put additions onto an elementary school or build a middle school, my kids are never going to go there. Make your decision. It's for your kids. Again, that's one person's perspective, not necessarily the community's perspective. So overall, I felt really good about the communication. Again, kind of stressing what I said earlier. You know, we have been experiencing, you know, this enrollment squeeze for some time. These are some of the pictures that were included in the report. You guys are amazing. You get into schools all the time, so these images are not anything new to you. And again, from studying and preparation from this, I see that, you know, the problem at Avery goes back to the 90s, early 90s actually, with some of their squeeze there. So these are examples of children that are, you know, makeshift rooms for kids to learn. Again, like I said in the report, not only does having our kids in these hallways create distractions for them, a lot of these kids are getting special support and services. So I also feel it also kind of signals to people like, oh, what's he or she in the hallway for? It's not an ideal situation on many fronts. Our faculty, you know, we have many staff that are in the hallways, again, working with kids, or that's where their offices are. Not complaining, not saying that this is something extraordinary to all schools, that aspect of it, but it is a disruption. Images of some of the crowdedness. Avery, both the schools, Avery and Edgar Road, their lunch programs begin in the 10 o'clock hour and extend to about 1 o'clock or after. They have a lot of kids that they're trying to squeeze into very small cafeterias. The picture on the left is Avery. There was a couple classrooms that were added here a while ago to, again, accommodate for the space at that particular school, which, again, they make it work. I mean, kids have lunch, but it's very tight. The kids are really close together. The image on the right is Edgar Road. Edgar Road is obviously, in all the data that we have, our school that is filling up the most. We saw a little bit of a dip in the number of kindergartners who showed up based on what we projected through Charles's data. For the Edgar Road attendance area, we got more than what he projected. A few years ago, I think it was 3, just to accommodate space, they took what was the equatable size-wise to the lunchroom, the staff lunchroom at Clark, and turned it into the music room. So those kids, the space looks a lot bigger, but those kids are really, really tight in there. And certainly we have 2 modulars already at that school with 4 classrooms, and we're either, the plan is, if we went with option B, would be to have additional modular with 2 classrooms. And even in that still doesn't take the kids out of the music room. That's looking to accommodate enrollment growth in itself. Again, further examples of hallways and staff that, you know, have eaten lunch, for example, out of Bristol, in hallways for quite a long time. So the space needs are now. We're projecting growth, but the space needs are also now. So we worked with Cooperative Strategies, and their support proved invaluable given their expertise. So this is what they do, and they're in schools across the country on a regular basis. But they really did facilitate good community engagement. We had forums at schools where I presented. We had a number of focus groups where we tried to target different constituency groups, as well as broader groups. We had multiple surveys, just made ourselves available to people, and people had a lot of say and input. really practicing that no idea was off the table, which sometimes would spill into the community just because, you're talking about some different things at focus groups, and because we wanted to have it, like, be open. What are your ideas? But feel like the process went really well. Cooperative strategies, through all the data, again, stressing to, as we did along the way, the decision is ours, ultimately yours to make with the direction that we go. But cooperative strategy said, in the work that we do, the data that you're getting from your community is really good. And then and again, you could look at it in a lot of different ways, but they said they support what your efforts are, whether it's A or B. And again, some people see, cooperative strategies would say they preferred B based on the data over A, but then when you look at A, like the last time around, it had a few more percent strongly support and more in the neutral category. But they said regardless, your community is supporting your decision and what you're trying to do here. So after considering all things, community feedback, reviewing data, looking at research, and again, kind of trying to be mindful of, as you know, and maybe a little bit critical of me at one point, I've tried to be like, obviously I say the strong recommendation here, but I've tried to remain as bias-free as possible. So I've really tried to, in my exploration of research, look for arguments for and arguments against for the options. And it's kind of one of those things like you see on morning shows, like, this week it's coffee's good, red wine's good. Next week, coffee's bad, red wine's bad. So you can, if you're looking for a particular slant, you could find it. And so I found some things, but some things are maybe a little bit inclusive, and just basically we have to go with what we believe. So looking at those things, running through the options, thinking of fiscal responsibility or commitments to equity as a system, option B is the one that we're presenting to you as far as a clear recommendation on our behalf. And I listed a lot of the specifics. I don't want to go into them, but really the three things. Although we started with need, although it would be one of the larger schools in the system, in the state, middle school wise, there's a feeling, I have a strong feeling that it's going to improve the educational experience for all district children. All district children to be in a 6-8 middle school. It's also going to improve the educational experience of some kids who get to go to school in their neighborhood. It provides the most space relief in district schools. This was the most enticing element. This is why Scott said option B would be the choice, is just because, and again, we could argue, are we crowded, are we not? Kind of what you saw in my reply to a resident. Like if we set our enrollment threshold, which was an early option, if we set our class size capacity at 26, 27 and extend up to 30, we're not crowded in the classrooms. Our lunchrooms are still crowded. Our other spaces are still crowded, but not where the kids are learning, which is where we know that we need the ratios the best. So it can be a little bit seen as relative, but option B does provide, in comparison to option A, 50% more space relief. And what Scott had said is that it also provides you the opportunity. Now again, our trends lines are not showing the need for an additional intervention, so to speak. But suppose your district continued to enroll and we go back to where we were in the 70s and 80s with 8,000. Probably not going to happen. Boomers are through. But you would have an opportunity at a much less cost to, at that time, add on to an elementary school than you would to do something really extraordinary at Edgar or at middle school. And our 50% enrollment, more enrollment with this option B is also basing the new elementary school on being a school of a size of about 400. Obviously, that school right now houses about 510 kids, so it could be beyond that. And lastly, it addresses a long-standing structural inequity within the school system. So speaking just a little bit to each of those, just real briefly, first of all, the improving of the educational experience. Having a 6-8 will provide a greater level of continuity of care for our kids from an academic standpoint, a social emotional standpoint. I think our schools do a phenomenal job. There's a lot of people who have talked. My kids had a great experience at Steger. Not everybody has a great experience at every school, every teacher. We all know that. You've had kids in the system. But to have students that enter a school provided with that same safety net that Steger provides, separation, special team building, special come together, and to have staff that know and are working with that child all the way through. It's a struggle at Steger, and they do an amazing job with it. But you get the kids, you're trying to figure them out, and then you start transitioning them, in February or March. So being able to provide that continuity in one space with administrators, with counselors, with social workers, with teachers that can say, hey, what worked with this child? You can do that now, but it's so much easier if everybody's in a building together. Elective offerings, our middle school students would be able to have, our sixth graders, more electives than they do now. Certainly we could provide the same electives or more electives to our current Steger. That's been brought up at this board table before. If we wanted to do a FACS, kind of Rob highlighted, it would be really expensive, or industrial tech at Steger. That would be costly facilities costs. But from a staffing standpoint, because we're going to try and be as tight with our staff as we can. We could share staff, which we do for music right now, but it binds us and restricts us in a lot of ways from a scheduling standpoint, because staff can't be in both places at both times. And so Chris has been a part of, I know back when she was in that role, regular annual meetings about music staff and just what can we do to get more flexibility. So this would allow that opportunity, not just for electives, but we'd also have the opportunity to say kids that are, maybe stronger in music or stronger in math or stronger in other things, that they could have more advanced type opportunities there. Patrick said it the other day, that the feeling that one school will create more of a middle school type community at that level than having two separate type schools. One mascot and the such. Along with that, thinking through the parent involvement engagement. I think all of you are probably aware that it's known, and Chris can speak to, Steger kind of being a drop-off in parent engagement. And it does actually pick back up at Hickson as the kids are there longer, just because it's that, kids aren't wanting the parents maybe to be there as much as they were at elementary. But in a single school setting, when you're not there for long, for years we talked about just Chris's struggle with trying to fundraise for different efforts, so feeling that they would benefit in that way. And again, the research varies on the effect on size. Size definitely matters. So having a huge school is not necessarily ideal, but it's important, as a lot of what I found is to how can you create small opportunities within the school, which we would do. Separate wings, separate lunch periods, you have your own counselor, you have your own AP. How do you create that within that particular environment? And I know Grace has a lot of ideas around that. Certainly, as I kind of quoted in the research, or not my research, the paper, that there are a lot of schools, when you look at, if you're just looking at academic performance, MAP testing, number of lengthy suspensions, some of our biggest schools in the area have the highest level of performance and have the least percentage of suspensions. Looking at the space relief, I kind of already addressed that. The long-standing inequity of not having a neighborhood school or an elementary school, because Steger is in the neighborhood. But Kathy has provided a lot of the historical context with me, as a few others. And it was in the late 70s, early 80s, there was the famous St. Louis DSEG court case. Our school district, there was a number of decisions that were going down about how, again, the ultimate application of Brown versus Board, which even in schools in Mississippi weren't doing in the 2000s, some places. But one of the things that they were ruling on is that you had to create diverse schools. How do we diversify schools? So not just, looking at all the schools within your system, how can you diversify them, so to speak? So the decision at that time, in line with how courts were ruling, again with what was coming down the pike, was to develop those non-contiguous zones in that particular area. And so again, I don't know whether law said that, because that our African Americans were the smallest group, that they had to be the ones, or if the lines could have been developed elsewhere and the kids could have gone into that neighborhood. Long story short, it's something that's bothered me since the moment I walked into the school district, and I don't fault. Well, I don't want to look back and fault anybody for what had happened. But the reality is that we still have children that are getting on buses to going to schools far away. I don't know what the research is or how their experience in our district has been affected, but we know academically and socially we still have a lot, or behaviorally, as far as discipline data, we still have a long way to go. And so I do have a wonder about that particular effect. And so, again, while Steger provides a neighborhood school for 6th grade students, for those students in 6th grade, it's not the same as having a group of kids that come together, especially for the first time in their educational career, and get to go to school with their neighbors, to have families that are able to come together, their first introduction to the system for many of them at one particular school. So, those are the three main reasons. You got to read some of the other stuff. I know there's probably going to be a lot of questions, agreement, disagreement, but I look forward to that when we get there. Any clarifications based on what I said at this point before we turn it over to Bruce? All right, Bruce. How did I do with my 15 minutes? Good.
I'm going to do this the last time.
What's that?
I got to get rid of the other, can you maybe turn yours off there? There we go, okay. So before we dive into the recommendation and report from the Finance Advisory Committee, I thought it might be actually helpful to give a little bit of background and context. Because 3 years ago, we wouldn't even be able to have a conversation about funding any significant capital projects within the district's current funding resources without a tax increase. At that time, the district 3 years ago had no available bonding capacity without increasing taxes, and was projecting budget deficits, growing budget deficits going forward. But my, how times have changed from both a capital and operating perspective over the past couple of years. From a capital standpoint, we accomplished an advanced bond refunding in December of 2017 that is projected to reduce future interest costs by about $1 million going forward, to reduce the load on the debt service fund. We transferred about $400,000 of unspent 2010 bond proceeds to help shore up the balance in the debt service fund that pays the interest and principal on district's outstanding bonds. And we transferred $1.2 million of surplus operating funds as well to the debt service fund. And then in 2017 reassessment year, we were the beneficiaries of a significant, sizable reassessment increase in our tax base, which directly impacts the amount of monies coming into the debt service fund as well. And that money was, in terms of the operating surplus, the $1.2 million that was transferred over, was made possible because the operating funds ran surpluses. Instead of the projected deficits for the past 3 years, our fund balances have grown by about our operating fund balances have grown by about $7.4 million. And so we took $1.2 million of that and transferred it over to the debt service fund. The Finance Advisory Committee has a recommendation in terms of using some more of that to further increase the district's bonding capacity without a tax increase, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I just felt it was important to kind of give that context going in here, because that has the situation we are in now has been made possible by specific actions and efficiency measures taken by the district and the board over the past couple of years, such as conversion to the state funding for the full-day kindergarten, as mentioned by Dr. Simpson earlier, restructuring of the teacher salary schedule, some energy efficiency measures implemented in the buildings, and the aforementioned advanced bond refunding, just to name a few. There have been several numbers of other individually smaller efficiency measures, but when they all get added together cumulatively, they make a material and significant impact. So that's created a financial foundation that gives the district some financial options for funding capital projects that were previously unavailable, even unthinkable a few years ago. So with that as a starting point, the district's Finance Advisory Committee undertook the task of developing a financial plan, a roadmap of sorts to support the space enrollment recommendation and the Building Advisory Committee recommendations on all of the other needs outside of space. The Finance Advisory Committee, similar to the Building Advisory Committee, it's a group of district residents that are business and financial experts. They've been in place for a number of years. They weren't pulled together just for this. They have been monitoring the district's budget process and financial position, meeting about every month during the school year. Their role in this particular initiative that we're talking about this morning was to identify and review capital project funding options ranging from the operating budget to fund balances to bond issues. However, in light of the magnitude of need, when we look at what the new space is going to cost and what the safety, accessibility, and other projects are going to cost, we get a total of that. Because of the magnitude of that need, the group pretty quickly settled on a bond issue as being the only real feasible option going forward. But we also had an eye toward the future. The Finance Advisory Committee this is not just a one-time shot where we use all of our available resources to solve existing problems and then have nothing left in the tank for the inevitable things that are going to arise in the future. They wanted to make sure that this was a recommendation that took care of current needs but was also sustainable and gave us some flexibility going forward to respond to those inevitable future needs that we know will arise, particularly in light of the district's aging infrastructure. We kind of have a unique window of opportunity right now, because while we've identified what the needs for that aging infrastructure is, a significant investment in that isn't necessary wasn't indicated to be necessary for the first several years. So we're talking 4 or 5 years from now when some of those bills are going to come due, so to speak. So this kind of gives us a window of opportunity before those needs start weighing on the district to take care of some of the other stuff now at this time. So what does this look like? What we looked at when we were looking at the bond issue, and I apologize for kind of all of these numbers floating around. That is just an indication of what it's kind of our engine that allows us to take a look at what the current debt service requirements are, what our current outstanding bonds, interest and principal payments are going to be, what our projected cash flows coming in from the current 0.5699 debt service levy is going to be, and then to project those out and determine Here's our revenue that we expect coming in for the district. Here's the current obligations of the district to pay off debt that's already out there, and then be able to see what's left over, when it's left over, to see what kind of new debt that might support. So with those numbers all then kind of drive down into represented graphically, it's a little bit easier to perhaps get a handle on. The total revenues for the district is the green line here. So when you look at the green line, when we make a transfer to it, that's for the spike if we transfer some money. So when we transferred the $1.2 million to the debt service fund, that's what this little spike is about here. And then this one would be an additional transfer that we would make to the debt service fund that we'll talk about in a few minutes that the Finance Advisory Committee was recommending. And so generally that revenue line, you can see a little bit of variation here, and that's because we've got some bonds that are outstanding that were qualified Build America bonds, and we get some amount of federal subsidy for interest payments while those bonds are still outstanding, and as they're retired, that federal subsidy goes away. So that's what the other little variations are here in the early years. And then by the time those are paid off at this point, then the revenue line is just simply following what the assessed value, what the projected growth is in the assessed valuation. And we're very conservative on that from the standpoint of what we expect the annual growth in our tax base to be. The assessed valuation growth, we're assuming an average of 1%. Average each year of growth in the assessed valuation. It's a little bit lower than what actual has been over the long term in the past. So we're pretty much built out school district. We don't have new subdivisions and new commercial developments coming in. We have additions, we have upgrades, we have reassessment coming around, that kind of thing. So we're a fairly slow growth kind of a school district right now. So that's kind of our revenue curve. The orange curve, the orange curve here is what the current what the requirements of the debt service would be. I show the yellow line here. That's what our current debt service requirements are. As we issue new debt, then the interest and principal payments, because we're right here now, as we issue new debt, then that line's going to increase because of the interest payments that are necessary and principal payments on that new debt. And from a standpoint of individual managing your own finances, you've got income coming in, and then you've got payments that you're making going out, and so you have to have savings. If your payments going out is greater than your income coming in, you need to have some savings in order to make up that difference until your income catches up with your expenditures. And so that's what this black line represents. This is the fund balance in the debt service fund. The red line down here is what our minimum fund balance needs to be so that the debt service fund is cash flow self-sufficient, so that we don't have to loan money from the operating funds to the debt service fund to make our interest and principal payments. We need to stay above that red line. And so that's when we look at making a transfer here, that goes into our balances and helps fund the deficit, the temporary deficit of when our expenditures are exceeding our revenues. One of the challenges here was the existing debt is on an increasing basis. You can see it's kind of going up. We're back here and we're trying to see over the hill, so to speak. And it's hard to, when you're lower than the tip of the hill in front of you, you can't see over what's on the other side. And what's on the other side is bonding capacity that's available on a no tax increase basis. So what we have to do is elevate our position through a transfer of funds to it, and then it raises our vantage point, and we can see over the hill, and we can get over the hill to access what is no tax increase, what would be no tax increase bonding capacity. This is where our revenues are exceeding our projected expenditures. that is projected available revenue that can go towards supporting bonds. And the ideal profile for a debt curve is that instead of it being an incline, it should be a decline, so that you're always able to see ahead of you and access that no tax increase bonding capacity. And so when we finally get to a debt profile that is, instead of an incline but is on a decline, then every few years we can look at a no tax increase, a bond issue, without having to increase the tax rate, and just take a slice of these available resources to be able to fund that. And what that looks like in terms of actual numbers here, for our immediate purposes, we have $22 million. It's this 11 million plus 11 million. We figure we won't be issuing all 22 million at the same time. We don't need $22 million from day one. We have construction, if we have construction projects and improvement projects, we will implement those and pay for those over time. So we would time our bond issues to reflect the cash flows that are necessary as we're building the projects and so forth. So we would probably issue the bonds in 2 different installments. But then as we look forward in future years, we would have still $7.2 million in 2023, and then 4 years later in 2027, another $7.2 million. This 22 million, this 7.2 million, that 7.2 million is all included in this line here, and included then in what our cash flow projections are. So the timing of a transfer here to keep our balances above the cash flow red line here is necessary, and keeps us above that for the duration, not just of the $22 million, of a potential $22 million bond issue now. That's what option B, the middle school option, would be. The option A would be a little bit less than that, so it would require a little bit less of a transfer of operating funds than this. But it just gives us projections and shows that we're able to support not just the immediate bond issue that we're talking about now, but that we still have something left in the tank, a significant amount left in the tank, 4 years from now or so, and then 4 years after that, and that becomes the kind of the pool of resources to be able to take care of those the deferred maintenance needs that are going to start coming due in the future. So what the Facilities Advisory Committee's recommendation is to the board. It's recommending that if option B is chosen, that it be funded by a $22 million bond issue on the April 2019 ballot. That's the only date that a 4/7 majority is required for this year. Contingent on the bond issue passage, and in order to support those new bonds, the committee was recommending that the board formally designate up to $3 million, depending on the exact amount that would be necessary when we have the bond issue and we find out what the actual interest rate is on the bonds and so forth. We would be able to update our cash flow projections and see what amount of transfer would be necessary, up to about $3 million, to put in a reserve fund. We could transfer that over to the debt service fund immediately, but it's not needed immediately when we look at the cash flows here, until we get to the point that the black line would drop below the red line. We don't actually need to transfer the funds, so we would just monitor when that transfer was needed. In the meantime, we could keep those funds in a designated fund that is earmarked to be transferred to the debt service fund if and when necessary. But if it turns out, for whatever reason, our assessed valuation tax base, because of reassessment or some new development, increases more than we expected, we get better interest rates on our bonds than were expected, the money's not stuck in our debt service fund, because once it goes into the debt service fund, it's stuck there. We put it in a designated fund, and then it's not needed, the board could always just take a portion of it, transfer that portion that's needed, and then and then move to bring the rest back into the operating funds. We also felt like it was important not to use all of the district operating funds that were, because we're looking at the debt service fund here, but we also have the operating funds over there. That is the day-to-day operations of the district, and that has cash flow needs as well. We have, because of the $7 million of accumulated surpluses that we've run over the past 3 years, we are now about $7 million, we're about $7 million, I believe, $7 to $9 million above what we need for cash flow purposes in the operating funds. So to take $3 million put over here in an account to be transferred to the debt service fund still leaves $3 or $4 million in our operating funds for potential future deficits in the operating funds as well. So that kind of balances the need for the capital projects and being able to leverage and increase what our no tax increase bonding capacity would be, while still keeping a reserve for potential future deficits in the operating funds. And it just it helps shore up the fiscal responsibility both in the debt service fund and in the operating funds for the district. So that's a summary of what the Finance Advisory Committee is recommending at this time.
Any clarifications on any of that before we maybe take a little bit of a break and come back, or do you want a break, or do you just want to roll into it? Or
I'm fine up there. Everybody else?
We'll take 5.
Okay, David.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'd like to take 5.
Sure.
I just want to say before we break, and let's make sure we turn off the mic during the break, but I want to thank you very much for your following the process and allow us to explain. I'm sure you have a lot of comments, a lot of things you want to contribute, questions, and you're very respectful as always, and I just really appreciate that. So take 5 and come on back.
Yeah, there he is.
Microphone's back up.
Okay.
Yeah, so just really wanted to give everybody at this time, you got a lot of information. Certainly you could still ask clarifying questions, but just open to any kind of questions, comments that you have at this point. And I also want to invite my administrators who have been a part of this process to feel free, like if you feel you want to chime in or contribute in any way, please do. So.
I'd like to just quick clarifying question for Bruce before we go into the
Okay.
general conversation. When you say, I mean, obviously the proposal is a quote-unquote no tax increase bond issue, what effect does this have on taxpayers, on their tax bills?
So when we say no tax increase, it really means maintain the current levy. Currently, the debt service levy is 56.99 cents. That levy would be maintained in the future. So if a taxpayer's assessed value stayed the same, the amount of taxes they would be paying into the debt service fund would just stay the same going forward. It would not increase because of the additional bonds that would be issued.
Wouldn't the more accurate way to describe it to be a no tax rate increase?
Correct.
Bond issue, so that what we're going to do, we're going to extend the repayment period, will extend out, the tax rate will stay the same, we don't need to increase the rate, it will extend out. Clearly we're spending money that's got to be paid for at some point, we're going to collect that over time, but the actual rate that's applied is consistent. And I think if we were to describe this as a no tax rate increase bond issue, I think that would be perhaps that would be a lot clearer to everybody as to what's actually going on.
Yeah.
I'm familiar, the language you've used all
Yeah.
along is the language that I've heard used in the entire time I've been involved in these things, and it's always frustrated me a little bit that really what we should be saying is it's a no tax rate increase, and that obviously the repayment period then extends further out.
Yeah, and there are some, the folks who are concerned about the accuracy of a no tax increase could continue to take issue with the no tax rate increase too, because it doesn't recognize what would happen to tax rates without the new bond issue. So maintaining the current tax rate, to say, maintaining the current tax rate might be a little bit more accurate. What I can demonstrate for you here, actually, on in terms of what we were looking at before, let's see, get that a little bit smaller so we can see the whole graph. So when we look at the graph here, the district is allowed to maintain up to 1 year's worth of debt service requirements in the debt service fund as a fund balance. So what we have to take a look at is, when does our fund balance, which is represented by the black line, when does that start exceeding what our annual debt service expenditures are, which happens right here as the balance exceeds what projected expenditures are. So at that point, the district would have to start rolling back the debt service fund. Now, this graph happens to include a $3.2 million fund balance transfer here, so we wouldn't need to do that. If we didn't issue new debt, we wouldn't make that transfer. So what we can do is we can come up here and we can eliminate that transfer. So now that transfer is not there, but the new debt is still being issued. So that's what happens. It shows we're way underwater. If we issue new debt and we don't make that transfer, we can't afford it here. But we can also then go to the new debt issues here, delete those, come back. So now we're not issuing any new debt, and what happens is, this is what our graph looks like in our debt service fund if we don't make a transfer and we don't issue new debt. We just keep servicing what's already out there. And what would happen here, you can see in 2021, 21, 22, about right here, the district would have to start rolling back the tax rate here if additional debt is not issued. So, that's kind of the point of folks who object to terminology of saying no tax increase bond issues, is it fails to convey the fact that the tax rate at some point in the future is going to have to be rolled back and there would be a tax rate decrease. And so, how can you be genuine and, full disclosure on things like that? No tax increase doesn't convey it. I'm not sure no tax rate increase would convey it to somebody who has that objection.
Well, and I'm sure you know that I think both David and I are coming from the perspective of just wanting full transparency, knowing that those
Sure.
concerns are out there, and whatever we can do to communicate that we get, that we're
Yes.
not rolling back taxes in the future,
Yes.
but because we're doing this.
Right.
But we're also not increasing tax rate currently.
Yes,
So that's just really why I asked the question.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
And actually, that was the
question.
That was
I'm
really,
sorry.
no, please, and I'm glad, because we're all thinking alike.
Yeah.
From the standpoint that we want that out there and to be explained, and because while a small portion of us have a very vested interest in making sure that it's done right, there's going to be a lot of people out there that will probably not peel back the layers of the onion to really understand. And I think there's also a common sense factor to say, there's no way that 5 or 6, 7 years from now, we can't be completely debt-free. I mean, there's no way we can be debt-free at some point in time. And while I'm older and my memory sometimes lapses occasionally, but I think we've maintained that 5.699 rate for as long as I've been on the board, if not fairly good number of years before that.
It's been a good number of years. You recall how much down
I think it was in 2001.
Yeah, so I mean, I got on the board in 2010 when the last no tax rate increase bond issue was passed for the high school edition. And that was all obviously on time, under budget. A lot of things came in well, good managed, and I fully anticipate that this sort of thing would be the future plans as well. So, but thank you guys for asking that, and Bruce, thank you for the explanation.
Comments or questions?
With regards to the actual space, I appreciate the details that were, especially the rationale, John, and your willingness to take a look at all the things that maybe weren't necessarily high on your priority, but high in the priority of what we really need to hear in the community. I think one of the things that we had challenged or asked questions about was a true recommendation for the vision of what Gibbons would be or what that elementary school would be. So to summarize, it would be a neighborhood school. It would not be of a magnet school or a component there or a lottery component. It would truly be a neighborhood school. And then what was previously known as the computer school, the single class per grade would phase out at some point in time. So there would be 6 grades, then 5 grades, then 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, until it's completely phased out.
And they were again, I started meeting with staff and had a meeting with parents like last spring. Like when we first started saying, okay, let's have a board subcommittee just to look at some of these numbers and what other numbers do we have. Started meeting with them last spring and have met quite a few times with them over the course of the year. And as late as December. And there was easily a consensus of the people with whom I spoke that, you know, if the decision came to be that we wanted to use that school to serve elementary school kids, then we felt like for all the kids it should be a single school and not have a lottery school down below and a neighborhood school up above. And so even the current families that weren't always excited about, you know, the phase-out process of their school, all believe that.
So just so that I'm clear then, so at the point in time this was implemented and Gibbons became a neighbourhood school, any children who'd been attending what was then the computer school would be grandfathered in and would be able to carry on in that school. But they would no longer be in a separate single class that's going forward. They would now be integrated into the whole school community, or would they actually maintain a single class going through?
The plan was for them to maintain a single class going through.
So eventually there would be just one 5th grade class.
Right, but it's more just how does that come together for the children that are there? So you're still, for the ones who are there, the kindergartners, the last year that the computer school exists versus you have a neighbourhood school, that cohort would go through as a single entity right the way through.
That's what the plan is. Now, if something happened where, you know, all of a sudden enrollment waned quite a bit, or, you know, I think the majority of, and that's what the one thing that we would do is we would certainly involve them. What I've said all along, I think I said in the report, is like we want to care for all the kids across our school system as best we can. So we will still provide transportation for the children who right now access transportation to go to Edgar Road and Clark from those non-contiguous zones.
Mm-hmm.
Like they still get to go to school. With the Gibbons children, the plan is for the 2021 kindergartners to be the last particular cohort through that school. Now, I don't, you know, will it affect the number of kids that go there or not, knowing that behind them aren't going to come? Like, we'll try and make it as good of an experience as we can. Like, you know, the parents would even joke, it'd be kind of like weird to like, you know, just a 4th and a 5th grade class, you know? Like, so I think they're open to supporting anything, but that's kind of what the plan is. So then we would, just like all the rest of our schools, because what we had said and is that knowing that we would have this overly generous phase-in period. And so so in 21-22, David, at Gibbons, you would have a 1st through 5th grade cohort down below. You would have at minimum a group of kindergarten students based on new boundary lines. Mm-hmm. Now, would you wouldn't expect to populate the entire school in one go then? No. Because then that would disrupt it, and that would mean we have to do that for everybody. That was part of the downside. That was the negative side of the generous phase-in process. You know, was that it's going to take longer. So we're going to have modulars longer at Edgar Road there could be a spike in enrollment, which we've acknowledged at schools. Class sizes could spike for a little bit, but I will say that, and the data show this, and in my conversations with people, that overly generous phase-in period is people see that as like a must.
So,
Whether it is or not, again, other school districts do it otherwise.
So presumably I will say that I guess my expectation was that at the point in time you get the school there and you get the classrooms there, you're going to populate all of the classrooms. You're not going to go and do this. I will tell you that whereas the idea that the children who've started off at any given school be allowed to go through and that be grandfathered, that makes perfectly good sense to me. The idea that you have this cohort that goes through that isn't going to mingle into what's now a neighborhood school does not make sense to me personally. I would actually, at that point, I would allow them, absolutely grandfather everybody, but I would not keep those classes, I would not see it as anything rigid to keep those classes. And I would actually populate... At Gibbons. And I would populate, and so if you had, kindergarten through 5th grade classrooms available, because almost what you're saying there, if you're not going to populate 5th grade, I would expect that in the first year, the 5th grade is probably going to be very, very small, the first year of that, because people are not going to want to move their children from another school in 5th grade. I recognize that. But I would not say I'm not going to populate 5th grade or I'm not going to populate 4th grade that first year out. I'd populate I'd alleviate the space concern as quickly as possible. For me, grandfathering, yes, but the idea that you keep this separate, you've got this separate sort of cohort that's going all the way through, doesn't, to me, make great sense.
I would tend to agree from the standpoint of even maybe K through 2 or K through 3, because for what David said, if I was a parent, I would probably not move my child for just 1 year to give the new Givens. But it's easier for me and more palatable for me to move my child at the 3rd grade level, knowing there's 3 years of being at that school.
Yeah.
Versus just doing a kindergarten only and then a K1 and then a K2 over those years.
It's really the great unknown, because we don't know how many parents are going to take their child out of their school and populate that school. Since we're allowing a phase-in process, we don't know. And again, the Gibbons families have been nothing but extraordinarily reasonable. So I don't think there would be a strong opposition. There is definitely some, like the smallness of the school. So it's kind of going to be something that has to be flushed
And
out.
perhaps to Steve's point, perhaps if what you say is 4th and 5th grade, you keep those contiguous because, as you're saying, and that's the last year, the last 2 years, perhaps that makes sense. But, kindergarten through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, it seems to me you should be able to amalgamate those. My personal feelings no more than that.
Well, especially if you have an incoming kindergartner and a 2nd grader. I don't think you're going to drive your 2nd grader to Avery and send your kindergartner to Gibbons.
Right.
At that age, it'd be a lot easier to have the option to send them both to the new school.
Well, that's
And
true.
knowing that we're
That would be
keeping-
our vote. That would be our family's vote.
Well,
We just don't know until it happens.
I want to be careful because I want to be able to understand that selfishly. When we say the Givens families, are you talking about the existing
Yes.
Givens computer school? Well, I'm going to say computer school, even though it's not named that.
Givens,
The
yeah.
Givens school family as they currently exist versus the Givens family that are the neighborhood Givens family that would attend that school.
Yes.
Okay.
So the families that applied and with the understanding of this is what our school would look like, those are the ones that I'm talking about. And again, it's just one of those things, it's kind of a wait and see of how many, and again, I think they've been nothing but reasonable, so I think they would be open to it, but I don't want to say we're not going to have, your 1st through 2nd graders, we're going to mesh you in with other, well, we may not have any other 1st and 2nd graders, or very few show up, so, we just kind of got, that's going to be one of those uncertainties.
That I recognise. And so the kindergarten will be the first ones who are from a districting and from a catchment area standpoint, will be the first ones for whom that is the first school, and I understand that. I just think the idea that you're going to sort of say you're going to do all 5 or 6 grades are all going to stay as sort of separate units right the way through, I think that you're taking away a lot of your flexibility there.
I think there's some timing that's available to help gather some of that information, because we are talking about Givens Elementary not being in place until 21, 2.
Yeah,
So you
Yeah,
have a couple
right.
of years to survey the neighborhood
yeah,
of saying,
Yeah,
should the time
absolutely.
come, respecting the fact that you can change your mind.
right.
But so that way that would help the planning stages to say, yeah, we look like we're gonna need a section of fifth graders, or we're gonna need 2 sections of fourth graders, and we're gonna need 3 sections
Yeah.
of kindergartners. That's going to give us a lot more heads up from the staffing and planning and cost
True.
needs. Given that time frame, we can use that to our advantage.
True. And I haven't spoken with the majority of parents, but I've spoken with a decent amount of them. And I think, they all, while we have a plan, they all recognize if we have, 4 kids, the ones that I've spoken with, if we have 4 kindergartners sign up for 1920, the plans may have to change. So they've been, again, the people that I've spoken with have been nothing about reasonable. So I do think that there is going to be space to, look at our plans, possibly modify, and then just adjust. And I think they'd be.
Right, and the space is made available by the fact that the plan is for the 6th graders to, in this plan, option B, to go up to the Hickson site.
Yeah.
With regards to the boundaries that will be discussed going forward and the grandfathering, which I'm not sure anybody have heard, and please speak up if I'm overstepping. I don't think anybody on the board has ever questioned the rationale and the reasoning for doing grandfathering for existing families and siblings at their current schools to stay where they're at. I know that we've had several people who said, I moved into the district to be in this particular school. I would say, if you're on the other side of the boundary and your child isn't in school yet, I'm really sorry, but you're in a district, you're not just in one school. And your child is scheduled to go to the new Gibbons in 21-20. If you have a 2-year-old, there's a good chance your child now needs to go to Gibbons instead of Avery or Bristol or Clark or what it is. The one concern I had, and we talked about it a little bit with regards to it being a neighborhood-only school, is we do have to be respectful of the fact that we do have a racial makeup throughout the district and want to make sure that we don't go back to what was like in the 70s. And I will tell you, having lived through it, I knew that Douglas Elementary was predominantly African-American, Clark was predominantly white. I don't want to see Gibbons be that, and I don't know if it would be. I'm not saying that it would be, but I'm saying that needs to be at least be a consideration at some point to make sure that we have an adequate representation of all ethnicities throughout the district. And maybe it becomes the openness to, hey, your home school is Clark, but if you'd like to go to Gibbons, say something. And that's okay.
I think the process that was used, option A, option B, has to be respectful of neighborhood schools and have to be respectful of diverse schools. So I think regardless, anything that I've heard, regardless of race, regardless of where people live, those things are of value. I think the one thing that is a realistic possibility, and I can't remember if it was in the email maybe I sent, I don't know, but if we're looking to, we have to realize that if we create neighborhood schools for all the kids, that there are definitely going to be some schools that are whiter. So for example, Clark and I grew up. Those are going to be examples of that we don't have as many people of color residents in those particular areas. So I think we'll look to try and have diverse schools as best we can, but not cutting it up in such a way that is disrespectful to the neighborhood component of the families of color that live in one area. So it would be an interesting process.
Well, and in comment to that, Steve, I understand what you're saying. I think in theory that is great, but at whose expense, at which student's expense, I will use the word integration in our school district happen. It's been at the expense of the black population in Northwestern because they're the ones that are being bused. White kids aren't being bused per se to move them into an area. And as it relates, why can't the students who are being bused currently be configured to a neighborhood school where they live right now, which would be Hudson or Avery, or even Bristol, which some of them are. What is that difference, you know? What are we talking about, 150 kids?
So you mean just to draw the lines? I mean, you
Yeah,
could,
you're going to have, you know, that happens everywhere where pockets of population, no matter whether it's ethnicity or based upon religion or based upon socioeconomics,
Sure.
they're going to move where they're going to move. And boundary lines are going to be drawn where they're going to be drawn to accommodate, hopefully not overcrowding the school. And I think we all in our society would like a wonderful mixture of everybody, but somebody pays the cost of being part of the mixture. And somebody is a beneficiary of getting that mixture. And I think there's a lot of families who have been beneficiaries of having black students in their classroom, but those kids have to get bused back and can't maybe participate as readily in after-school activities or parent kind of PTO conference kinds of things. So,
All good points.
you know, that's really another consideration here too. You know, and we're again looking back and not saying, well, that was a horrible decision. That was a decision based upon information and history at the time.
yeah.
So, you know, what can we do to remedy that within our ability and our authority to make that more equitable for those kids, even now?
Yeah.
Thoughts, comments on that?
I think the other thing is that so many times it's the parents who are more emotionally invested in things, whereas a child who is a kindergartner, first grader, second grader,
Yeah, that's true.
tends to mix with their new classmates at their new school, and now they have this old group of friends and they've got this new school group of friends, and they're kind of looking like, why is my mom so upset? Why is my dad so upset? Because they're happy.
Yeah.
Because they go, they like their teacher, they like their new playground, and in '75, whenever they drew the district differently, because Steger and Hickson became 7th and 8th grade schools, there were a lot of families, but I think '75 was different than it is in 2019. I think the attitudes were different. I think people are much more open to the fact that there's inevitable change that we have to consider, and we have to make sure that the rationale and that the equity is there in redrawing the lines, and hopefully the kids will win out over the parents as far as keeping things in perspective.
I think as far as equity is concerned, like you said earlier, is an outcome. So I think as long as all the schools are receiving the same, or at least close to the same amount of funding, the same quality teachers, same opportunities for after-school activities, you know what I mean? It really kind of doesn't, I'm not gonna say it doesn't matter, but it's much less important if you have more African Americans at Givens, as long as they got the same opportunity as the ones at Clark. So the makeup of North Webster is also changing. It's much less the way it used to be. So even with that, you're gonna have just the mere fact that there's a lot less African Americans in North Webster than there used to be, and Rock Hill. You're just bound to have some schools that are gonna be less diverse.
Keita, I would appreciate what you're saying, and I think it comes from a historical background too. But what I would want to see in our district is knowing that there is a socioeconomic status definitely that is lower within North Webster, Rock Hill, that we would resource our schools differently. In fact, that we would maybe even consider putting more resources where they're needed. If there is, for example, a school or two that then would have a higher number of lower socioeconomic students, that we be resourcing them properly.
Well, that's what I mean.
Equitably.
Yeah.
Equitably.
That's
Yeah,
what
the
I mean,
equity
as
doesn't
long
mean
as
equal, it means
Yeah.
putting the money where it's supposed to be put, and
Right.
to benefit all.
That's what I mean, as long as
Right.
the outcome
Right.
is equitable, however we get there, I think would be the point.
But I would also want to say, I'm really excited about the fact that there might be a neighborhood school. I'm terribly excited about it. But hearing that we would be going one school grade at a time concerns me when I know that the community expressed a desire to, well, I don't know how we worded it, but to get rid of the modulars. And so it seems like we're going to be prolonging the modulars.
You know, in fact, more people voted in favor of keeping them.
In favor of keeping them? Oh.
More people voted in favor of keeping the modulars.
Favor.
Would you rather, not keeping the modulars long-term, but would you rather the modulars be removed and we adjusted boundaries quicker, or would you like, what was the question, Bruce? Do you remember what the question was?
I thought you were in favor of the removal of modulars.
Ultimately.
I don't know how it was worded, but I do know that we have been consistent from the beginning about the desire to grandfather, and if we do that, the
Yeah.
modulars will have to remain for
Yeah.
longer than we would like them to. So
So
I feel like we were clear about that.
Basically, a lot of families, if I'm understanding it, as long as they're not affected immediately,
Right. I thought
the
question
modulars
was,
can
should
stay.
the district
Prioritize the removal.
prioritize removal or elimination of the modulars. And there was some post-survey concerns that that might have gotten confused with also increased class sizes, that some folks assumed when they answered that, well, if we eliminate the modulars, my class sizes are going to increase, so therefore I don't want to get rid of the modulars. And so we weren't sure that, in retrospect, that the question was worded as well as it could have been to get the answer we needed.
Yeah.
I mean, my sense is that if you get the space at the Gibbons neighbourhood school online as quickly as you can, and you get as much of that space as quickly as you can, to a certain extent, you're going to see what comes in. And so you may have very few. You may have. So your kindergarten class, you know what's going on because they're going to be. You're going to redistrict it for them. But for the other grades, you're going to see sort of what comes in. If you've got enough to go and, presuming you've got the space there, if you've got enough to fill 2 sections. At each of those, and that then allows you to then go and pull back on the modulars slowly. That is great. I wouldn't paint yourself into a picture where you say we're going to get rid of the modulars by here, because still keeping the class sizes where they are is important. And whether it's, whether you get rid of the modulars sort of now, or whether it takes the next sort of 5 years to go and do it. That's almost, I think what you want to do is to build in as much flexibility as possible, make the space available within the neighbourhood given school, and then utilise it as people choose to come there. And frankly, early on, there may be for some people the idea, A, it's a neighbourhood school, but B, if there are 2 sections, the sections may have, 15, maybe 2 sections of 15 kids versus, I've got 19 or 20 at another school, and that may be something that is attractive to people. I don't know.
It's true.
It is the great unknown, as you said, but this whole conversation reminds me of our conversation when we did full-day kindergarten. Remember, we were all like, people are going to want half-day, people are going to want, what do we do
it's
about
true.
that? Nobody
It's
wanted
gone.
half-day. Yeah, you just can't, you can't predict.
Here's one of the, and I know we've asked them a few times, but I would rather my children either remain at their current school knowing they may be in a classroom, 156 said yes, or change schools knowing that they would be in a permanent space, 129 said yes.
Maybe that's what you
To kind of transition to the 6th grade wing at Hickson, I really appreciate the extent of effort to address some of the concerns that we had heard from people throughout not only the surveys but verbally, as far as the desire to keep the 6th grade kids separate from the 7th and 8th. And I know there's some effort to keep the 7th and 8th grades existing at school at Hickson, keeping them fairly separate at this point in time too. So adding the 6th graders would just simply mean you've got 3 groups to keep kind of separate versus the others. I appreciate that fact because I do think that's important, especially in the first few years of the transition. But, as I've said several times in various committees, middle school is a hard period of time for almost every child. And if you all look back at your own 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, I'm sure you could pick one year out of those 3 that was probably tougher than the rest of your years after and your years before. So keeping as much of that group in their own, I do really like the one less transition, because I still think you get the feel of a class coming together. You're just doing it at Hickson grounds versus at the school at the Givens grounds or the Stevens. And I think the transition is great, or one less transition is great. And in general, overall, there's a tendency to look at the numbers financially and say, yeah, this makes the most sense for the least amount of cost. Well, that would swing you to option A. But I like the fact that the Building Advisory Committee, the Finance Advisory Committee, the board, the district, and I think a great majority of our community members that we heard from said, do it the best now for the long term instead of putting a Band-Aid over this and then 5 years from now can't come back and saying, well, you know what, guess what? We're where we thought we were going to be. We didn't fix it all then. But this gives an opportunity to not only have the space needs concerned, but having sat through some of the Building Advisory Committee things and looking at Bruce's survey results and the rankings and weightings and everything like that, there's a significant amount of non-space related issues that can be dealt with this plan and these monies. And I think that's something that we've all, for whether you've been on the board a year or you've been on the board almost 9, those were issues that have always been there and looming out there. In some cases, it was a year away, in some years it was a 10-year away, but they have to be dealt with. And I think this is also encompassing those into this plan. So I appreciate the outside, the one little bubble thought process that went into it.
Well, I think, just speaking to that just real quickly, is I do think that, I think we've all, I think as a district, as a community, I think even in our roles as administration and board, we've all benefited from our financial, where we are financially and the moves that we've made and where we position ourselves now. And so I don't think any of us would, I think we'd all love to be able to roll back, that debt service as Bruce described. Having said that, our needs are real. And, the accessibility has been something for a long time. The space has been around. Safety and security, while it's always been important, it's definitely been elevated in recent history. And so while option A, does satisfy a need in terms of space in our schools, we get more with option B. Plus what I feel, and I think a lot of us feel, is the value of the educational benefit of 6-8 and the Steger. So as Bruce and I said, if somebody's position would be in the community like, I just don't like it because of the finances, well, or some people may disagree about some of the educational benefits of the things, that's fine. But you can't just, it is what it is, and you respect it.
Well, and that's
where they're coming from.
When the Building Advisory Committee put in that ranking, which you said educationally and safety, there could be, and I think we talked about it, is what should be 4, what should be 5.
Sure.
Well, the rationale kind of came down to that if kids aren't safe and we can't provide a safe environment, then the educational part suffers.
Absolutely.
Correct. So that's what kind of swung education to 4 and safety to 5, as I recall from the discussion. That was kind of the deal breaker. So I'm sure you guys had hands up, but I thought that was
Ms.
important.
Dahl?
So how much in the end, when it's all said and done, are we going to not have kids in the hallways? Are teachers going to have teacher lounges? Like how, in the big picture, is it going to alleviate? Because I feel like kids in the hallways is a safety issue.
It is a safety issue.
Good question, and I had that also just to add on because you made the comment about the art room at Clark not changing. That even with option
At Edgar Road.
Oh, I think, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, option B, again, because of our phase-in process, it will take a little bit longer. That's one of the things Scott and Karen said from the very beginning, is that, you're giving an overly generous, phase-in process.
And that's okay,
but that's one of the community thoughts. So, but once we are able to go through that phase-in process, and maybe it happens sooner rather than later, we will not have kids in hallways. We'll be able to look at an Avery Elementary, because that's one thing that's come up. There was a number of Avery parents that are like, where are we? And their space relief would largely come through the redrawing of the boundary lines. And so we would be able to, again, not just give them more playground space, but also look at opening up, like, you know, those classrooms where there are classrooms right now, giving them a bigger cafeteria.
So kids aren't
You know,
getting lunch
having,
at 10 o'clock in
Those
the morning.
lunch,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
yeah, so it would definitely, you know, we haven't painted a picture of it. You know, what Karen has said basically is, you know, again, you're gonna have an elementary school that is intended to serve approximately 400 kids, and we would estimate based on burst enrollments existing and stuff like that, so you'd free up quite a bit of space there, plus more, but yeah.
So I feel as though we've talked a lot about the space issue. We've talked just very peripherally about the safety issues and the access issues. And to me, almost, the space is obviously important, but to me, the safety and the ADA accessibility and things like that are almost more important. They're to me, I mean, solving the space issues clearly is a big win, but they're the really big win, going and taking care of those safety issues there. And I think certainly, as I've talked to people, I think that's that. So I mean, for me, one of the reasons to do something is really, first and foremost, is to take care of safety and accessibility.
Yeah.
I have a clarification question because I'm kind of not understanding the phase-in process. Is the phase-in going to be more volunteer? Like, you know what I mean? Like, are we going to draw the lines, and then if you want to go to Gibbons Seeger, you can go?
Yes, so if you are at the, what would be the new Gibbons Neighborhood Elementary School, starting in 21-22, which would be when the middle school was fully operational, that would be the first year of the neighborhood Gibbons Elementary. And so if you have you're a kindergartner and you're in that zone, that's where you go. But if you are in Bristol and you're a fourth grader, or Clark and you're a third grader, we're giving you the permission through this generous phase-in process to finish at that school. Now, if you choose.
Even though you live in the new Gibbons drawing zone.
Right,
Yes.
so
Oh,
that's,
But you're grandfathered in to keep going where you've gone up until that point.
right. So that's where it's gonna have to be, and again, we would have 2 years, because there's enrollment implications, there's staffing implications, like how are we gonna do this if 5, 6, 10, 15? Because we're still gonna have to be mindful of our resources, our staffing, so we're gonna have to possibly, say no, maybe explore some different, give parents options for multi-age classrooms, which isn't something overly radical, but you need a competent teacher in doing that. So yeah, that's how it would look. And so, and again, at Avery Elementary, if you're a kindergarten, any school you're a kindergartner in 2021, the plan is you get to stay at that school.
Mhm.
But your sibling who comes in 21, 22, they gotta go to the other school. So that's like the Simpson family. Luke will be 2021 kindergartner, Charlotte will be a few years down the road, so I think it would be kindergarten, second grade. We're probably highly likely in a redrawn zone, whether it's Clark or Gibbons, so Charlotte would be assigned to one of those schools and Luke to the other. So then as a parent, I can make the decision of, do I want to just have them both go to the same school or not?
Well, I think the hope is that even though you're grandfathered so that you can remain at a different school, if you reside in the Gibbons boundary area, once that school's open, our hope is that people will go.
Yeah.
And then we won't have the modulars as long, and we
Right.
won't have,
Absolutely.
They can market it and make it fun and exciting.
I think
that's-
so.
I think that's really important.
I think so too. So you
Yeah.
make everybody want to go to Gibbons.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Kind of, well, I'll just keep going with this. On between A and B and the projected utilization of the buildings. On A, it was really Avery that was the building that was going to be overutilized in 22-23. And actually, excluding the modulars. And then in option B, we had like Avery and Clark and Edgar Road as being kind of overutilization.
You know, and that was, Arnold, there was some confusion on that, and that's prior to boundary line adjustments.
Okay, well, what's the information with boundary line adjustments?
What the projected utilization be, we don't have it. We know that, kind of like I sent out and I put online, the correction of option B, elementary capacity utilization is 91%, and A, 94%. Karen had produced something. Let me see if she included. Yeah, she did. We don't have what the capacity would be, just because we haven't drawn the lines exactly, but that's something that we could hypothetically generate and produce.
Because to me, that's important, because going off of this information, what parents were seeing, and what I'm looking at on the latest thing that they gave was those 3 schools would have overutilization, and 1 school on A would have overutilization. And knowing how the population is spread in the district, you know, the boundaries, what those boundaries would look like are, you know, they're going to be very interesting. The Steger-Gibbons boundary is going to be extremely interesting for people. And I just know what joy people have in talking about boundary line changes. That was that one.
So yeah, all we could generate hypothetically what it would be, but we know that we could get to a district average in this one of 91%.
I think the last thing I would want the public, those people who have had children who go through the school district, those people who have never had children go through the school district, or those people that have are retired here or whatever, the last thing I would want them to realize and think is that we're going to do something and then not be able to equip it or have the students go there and be there.
Yeah.
That's kind of, people would look at, what are we doing?
Yeah.
That would not be good. I have a question as it relates to the cost of A and the cost of B. We have the cost of B being $16 million, correct, roughly?
Right.
And then the cost of A being between like 7 and 8.5 million, and then 1.5 for like an A everything, so a total of 10 million.
The 7 is Clark and Edgar Road, the 8.5 is including Avery.
Okay, so we're talking about 8.5 then total.
8.5 total.
Okay, and then how much, because what David was talking about is exactly true, and really what Steve was talking about that the Building Advisory Committee did. If you're not safe or secure in your school, you're not going to be learning, period. You know, that's even not only a physical kind of thing, it's an emotional kind of thing with bullying and taunting and those kinds of things. But if that was a huge priority, that was part of the discussions that we had within the community. And we really haven't talked a lot about that, and the ADA thing has been bantered about for 10 years, and not a lot has been done to address that. And the safety and security things, I think, are extremely, well, they're on the front burner for most families right now, considering what happens in schools. So I guess my question would be, we've got 8.5 million for A, we've got 16 million for B. How much were we planning on spending on security on A, safety and security, and how much were we planning on spending on security for B?
I don't have the breakdown for safety and security. I have the total for safety, security, accessibility, abatement,
Well,
all
right,
of
all
those
those, right.
Yes.
Right.
For option A, the entry option, it was 8 to 8.5 million for those other kinds of things. I think the total amount was 17 million for that, so 8.5 for that would be 8 for the other projects, 8.5 for space. For $22 million bond issue for the middle school option B, that would be about $6 million for the other kinds of projects.
And just for clarification, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's not a change in the actual safety and security for either option A or B. Is that right?
For safety and security, there isn't a difference except the ground level window film is kind of the last one that makes the cut. That wasn't actually highly rated in the community survey. And it was highly rated through the rubric, and so the question kind of with that being the last one, when you prioritize them by the rubric score, while it wasn't highly rated by the community survey, whether we reconsider funding that versus some of the accessibility things that otherwise wouldn't be funded.
So it might make the cut in B, but it won't make the cut in A.
It's possible, it's kind of on the edge, kind of right on the balance of, it could possibly make it. It also depends on, will our other projects that are the space and the other safety projects that are ahead of line, will they come in at or under budget? If they come in over budget, then with that being the last one in line, it would be the one.
Because you've got that ranking there that you
Yes.
can move that bottom line up or down depending on your availability.
Yes, but in terms of the safety projects under both of them, the secure vestibule single point of entry is funded under either option. The exterior doors, secure interior and exterior doors with alarms, funded under both of them.
So basically what I'm hearing you say is that under both, the safety and security needs for the most part are going to be funded under both.
Correct.
Okay, now
Yes.
what about the ADA issues, the accessibility issues?
For the most part, funded under both.
And what about the abatement issues?
That would be funded under both.
So where's the $2 million difference?
Yeah, we've got a $6 million difference.
No, I thought it was 8 million for...
Yeah, $2.5 million.
Yes, so where's that? What isn't getting done in the one that is getting done?
Bruce, I pulled it up on the board so you can see it.
Yeah.
This is that prioritized list.
The two yellow ones, right?
Talk about the auditorium and the ground
So
level.
if you go to, what is it, line 20, I believe, the ground level visibility, ground
here.
window, that's the and that shows $6.5 million to that point, right?
Yep.
Cumulatively, that's what's funded under option B, the middle school option. If you drop down.
And everything above. Obviously, if it's under B, it's under A2.
Right.
I see what's happening there, okay.
And then
These two not under A.
the funding is a little bit
Well, it's
more
basically everything.
under option A. The ones that are on the bubble between the two is the auditorium. That's estimated to update and complete the rigging system, cabling system, and the improvements needed to make the auditorium fully usable with lighting, sound and stage prop, rigging, cables and everything. That's about $1 million. The restroom and miscellaneous accessibility modifications is $500,000. And the floor tile abatement. There would be some floor tile abatement being done district-wide. It's about $300,000. The total of those are $1.8, $1.9 million. That's basically the $2 million difference between them.
Bruce, what was in yellow? What is yellow indicate?
Those, I think the yellow I highlighted because those were cost estimates that we hadn't really firmed up completely.
Okay.
So that was just kind of a note to me that there's still some additional work that we needed to do due diligence to make sure that that number was a good number for the cost estimate.
So it was just coincidental that they added up to about the $2 million.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what caught my eye. Yeah,
Yes.
that caught my eye as the $2 million. That's why it said that, the two yellow items.
I guess for me, the fundamental question here is, for anything on this list, we go back, we said at the beginning, was what are needs versus what are wants. And so are the things in that $2 million, which category do they fall into? Because if they're needs versus wants, then I think we have to find a way to go and fund them. And you're back to the idea of whatever we're going to do here, we'll go for what we go for whatever we go for. But fundamentally, if we're not solving the needs in safety, accessibility, those issues, then we haven't done, that to me is the first thing we do, and space is very important as well, and we address that too.
But that's where the rubric came in.
But what I'm saying, so if these, but that's why I come back to say, are these needs or wants? Because if they're needs, I don't care where they come in the rubric, they need to get done. That's the definition. And if they're wants, then fine, we can have a different view of it. But I want to know, and I'm not qualified to
I
say,
think the committee made that determination.
you know, as to whether.
Well,
you know,
that's where the calculations of the rubric came in, is the needs and the wants.
that just tells you what
multiplied by-
money you've got. That says I've got $6 million, how do I spend $6 million? What I'm saying is if you actually need to spend 8, you need to spend 8. I don't care where the rubric comes out.
Yeah, but that helps you prioritize where the money fell in respect to your needs and wants. The
Okay.
needs and wants were part of the calculations.
Yeah, it's a judgment call
Mhm.
as to where want ends and need begins. The rubric puts everything in priority order, but it doesn't define things as either
Mhm.
needs or wants. And so that becomes then a judgment call, and really on the district and the board's behalf as to what's a need and what is a want for the district.
Well, how unusable is the high school auditorium?
The top half is unusable.
So we have somebody coming in to offer a bid that can, it could be equipped to be like most high school auditoriums. Our auditorium, I think Patrick talked to you a little about, we have like a really elaborate like fly system, like really, really elaborate. Bruce, you know better
It's
than I do.
elaborate and old.
It's archaic.
It's as old as the auditorium is. It was cable-based. No one uses that kind of rigging anymore because it's old and because it's very labor-intensive to use and because of some safety issues with it. It had to be taken out of service. It was some heavy props and backdrops and so forth, and some lighting, heavy lighting would be suspended by. And so that aspect of the auditorium isn't usable. We can't use that for backdrops and props and lighting. And so the lighting has to be used. It has to be portable lighting that's that's just movable on the floor. And they have to get by without having the stage props and on tables that you can raise and lower. And so you can use the auditorium for its purpose. The stage is there. You can do lighting that is on the floor. The seating has all been replaced. You just don't have the full functionality that most other auditoriums do. So you kind of have to improvise on it.
Because structurally, the second deck, the mezzanine, is still, I mean, it's not in danger of falling down. That was kind of the first knee-jerk reaction was, what do you mean, the whole second floor is going to go? That wasn't it. It had to do with the rigging, what was above it.
Yeah.
And people don't even fix that stuff anymore. It's so old. It was 1928.
Yeah, we run a
when
company
the auditorium was
and
open.
they declined to even repair it for fear of liability concerns if something would happen after their repairs even.
So, good discussion. Just to focus our conversation back to what we need to decide today, in terms of the $2 million, $2.5 million difference on the safety and security and accessibility issues, does that concern sway you or anybody else away from option B toward option A? I'm trying to figure out where
Yes.
we're going with this. So you would be more in favor of option A and using that money to accomplish, using additional money to accomplish some safety?
Yes, and I'll
Okay.
explain that.
Thank you.
We've done and I think we've done a thorough job of getting things. But what I think in the past, and this is my opinion, of when we've gone to the public and represented what we plan to do, we've not completed what we've planned to do. And we've had an ADA study, how much of that is going to be taken care of if we go with option A or option B? Because it's a pretty thorough ADA plan.
Yes, the bulk of it would be, all of our buildings would be fully accessible under option A or B. The question then becomes, with the restroom modifications and the other, is how far does a person have to go in the building to be able to access the services that they need? They're going to be able to get there and do it, but instead of a an accessible restroom being available in the wing or on the floor that they're at, they're going to have to possibly, if we don't do some of the accessibility restroom modifications and so forth that we were talking about here, they'll have to go down the hall, get in the elevator that'll be there, because this puts elevators everywhere. We need elevators so that it's accessible, that the services and accommodations aren't going to be as conveniently accessible in the building as they otherwise would be if we did this additional work. They're still going to be able to get there, they just have to go further in the building than they otherwise would have.
And I want to clarify, the reason I'm asking these questions is because we haven't gotten into this position overnight. This has been years in the making, and we can't get out of it overnight. It will be years in getting out of it. The elevators at Avery are $750,000. Well, $750,000 for something else to happen at Avery would be a great thing if we didn't have to have elevators, you know? If the building had been, could be reconfigured somehow, or something like that. I'm just throwing that out there. The other thing, we did an AIG, or AGJ control review. And I know this was one of the security reviews that has been done. How much of that would be completed under A or B?
We would all, well, that be.
That's the insurance, the Gallagher review.
Oh, okay. All of that would be completed except for the ground level window film. That is kind of on the bubble.
Okay, and then we also had that $50 million thing that, you know, in the next 5 years, we've got that looming out there as some cloud on the horizon. How many of those projects would be completed under A or B?
Some of this work was identified in the safety study as well, like the replacement of the exterior doors and some things like that, the elevators, some things like that were identified. So a portion of that would have been. It wasn't a portion that was necessarily programmed to happen within the next 5 years, because it was just doing it based on life expectancy, age, condition, and that kind of thing. Everything that had been identified during that first 5 years that are needs would be is getting accomplished. Not necessarily as this, but as just part of the maintenance department and the operating budget. There were some things like the complete sprinkling of all of the buildings that was programmed in the first 5 years, but that's a discretionary item. It's not a maintenance item. It's not required. It's not a code requirement, but it's something that eventually that the district would like to pack off, and it's something that as we do work on the buildings, we could be required to do, because if you do a substantial expansion or renovation, it triggers those requirements, but absent that, we wouldn't be required to sprinkler it. As part of the building projects, like with the addition at Hickson, part of that cost is sprinklering the whole building. Part of the $16 million estimate for that is sprinklering.
That's what we estimate. That's what we think they're probably going to make us do.
So
that's included in the price.
However, if the, on option A and B, on option A, where we're doing additions to Clark and Edgar Road, the new additions would be sprinklered, but the current building, the remainder of the current building would not be sprinklered in that. There is a cost estimate for what that would cost in case those requirements would be triggered. We don't think it would be, because it's a fairly small addition, that there can be a separate firewall and it can be contained in a separate area. There's not substantial renovation to the rest of the building that would be substantial enough to trigger the code requirement to sprinkler it, but it's possible that could happen too. Those were things that were included in the facility study, the assessment that you're talking about, some of which would get done as part of these projects, some of which were discretionary, and the timing and extent is at the, is more at the judgment of the district. But all of the needs identified in that for the next 4 or 5 years will get covered either through the bond issue or through the maintenance budget.
Okay. And to me, there's several things on the table that we've kind of talked about. You know, we talked about safety, we talked about abatement, we talked about ADA issues, we've talked about space issues, we've talked about equity issues, we've talked about what's good. educationally. I don't disagree with, a middle school concept or putting 6-8 together. I think there's some inherent benefits there. I'm not in favor of a school that large, period. I don't think that's a good thing to have happen. The ones that have been mentioned, I think that has more to do with leadership and programmatic elements than it does with being a large school. I think there's benefits programmatically both ways. I see the elementary schools have not had their due for a long time. High school's gotten a lot of bells and whistles. They're pretty much set. As I've looked at the enrollment, they're not going to have a problem. We still will have some issues. I've heard from people in the community that said we need to raise class sizes just a little bit. I would, and this is not a slam on where we are or where we're going, but I think if academically we were stronger, I would have a more inclined feeling to go different directions than what I'm feeling right now. But because lower class sizes don't necessarily mean better academics or better achievement or better, or you find it 50-50 both ways. I just want us to be good stewards of the money. I want us to be, if we say we're going to do something with the, and you've done a good job with finances, Bruce, I want to compliment you on that. If we say we want to do something in the community, we need to do it. And I understand letting people kind of continue through. But if you have a school that's open and you have capacity a third of what it could be, that's problematic. And it's just kind of looking at all those loose ends that aren't tied up, what boundary lines will look like. People will go kicking and screaming. People will be happy about some things. So, I'm just trying to find a balance there because there is no quick fix, there is no fast fix. And people will look back on us in 5 years and say, why did they do that? Or they should have done this. Now we see we have this problem. Or see, we're great with, we don't have that problem. And there's always the armchair people. But it's the 7 of us who have to make the decision with that. And I take that very seriously, as I know you do. And we're all trying to do what we think is best for the students in this school district, which is what you exactly said, and the people who we represent in this community. So,
Can you expand on your concerns with the big school?
I think, anytime you have more kids, you have more potential, what I would call problems, because it's just more people. You have more resources that have to be managed. I think there's I think the benefit of that is the 6th grade gets some of the activity kinds of things that a middle school, they could if we were called them a middle school and gave them middle school things. But I just don't think it's a wise thing to go that large with that age of population. If you have to, for reasons, then you do. But I don't find many middle schools that big in the state of Missouri. I think there's reasons for that.
So you, a couple of things. You'd asked, did this change my mind in terms of A versus B? I come to a different conclusion than Arnold. If I look we've got about
And let me back up, because I think we're kind of at the point where we need to progress. I think Arnold opened the door to leaning toward A, leaning toward B, or nothing at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an option at this point as well. So if anybody is feeling a preference toward either of those 3 options, or you want to throw out a 4th, that's fine too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, as I look at it and as I look at where the $2 million is, so I can only rely on what I hear from Bruce in terms of almost $1 million for this ground level window visibility. I love the drama program. I love what we do from an arts perspective. I'm afraid that at the end of the day I find that to be a want rather than a need. So I can get to funding everything that I do think the restrooms, I know they come down lower. I do think proper restroom accessibility, on the other hand, I think is very important. So I can come to a point where I can see B and doing everything that sort of goes down through there. And I'm afraid those two probably, the visibility and the auditorium probably get knocked out of that. So I can see a fund A. In terms of the size of that 6th grade, of that 6th, 7th, and 8th, The reason it doesn't concern me is because whilst it's going to function as a single building with a single operator, the idea that you're going to largely work to go and keep the grades separate, and you're not going to have these interactions. I believe that will go a huge way to overcoming the issues. If this was a high school, where there's just a lot more, amalgamation that's designed very differently, at 6th, 7th, and 8th, I think that would be a greater concern. For me personally, the fact that there is a conscious decision to try to keep the grades largely separate in terms of their interactions, but to take advantage of all the benefits that you get from the bigger building, that strikes me personally. That's a winning decision. Yes, you've got more children who are there, but you've more children who are nonetheless segregated. So I personally believe that with strong administration, with good sort of oversight, that some of the issues you talk about that you get as anything gets bigger, I believe those will be overcome through good management and good structuring. That's my personal view. For all of these things, I mean, if you're asking us where do we come down, I think that, to my mind, I think that B makes the most sense. What I would say is that if we find that within our no tax rate increase levy, we don't have enough money, I would rather go and get the little extra money that we needed to go and do the job properly. I realize it's not as good a sell. No, actually, in addition to we're going to extend the repayments, we may have to raise the rate. I would rather do that, but get it done right. That's the way I come out on this.
Thank you. Steve?
With regards to both comments that we've heard so far from Arnold and David, I will tell you, I don't necessarily agree that we have under-delivered. I don't know an area where we have said we were going to do something and we didn't, so I would like to hear more from you on that, Arnold, if possible. But because I can go back to the example of what we did with the last approved bond issue, which was the 2010, which was $36 million, which the addition to the high school came in not only on time but under budget, which allowed us the additional almost $6 million to do other things that were on the priority list that wouldn't have been dealt with had it not been good management, some good fortune, but mostly good management throughout the process of all the parties involved. I'm hoping to see those same sorts of things. I think having a concrete plan with the pecking order. David, to your comment about the auditorium, I will tell you that if you sat down and talked with the people at the high school, and people who have been at that high school for a long time, the auditorium is not just a drama and performance area. It is an area that actually touches every single student instructionally. They have programs, the veterans program that they do. There's a whole bunch of other things that the auditorium does that I think becomes an integral part of the educational process, and it touches a lot more people than just the performing arts and their families. So I don't want to push that one down from the standpoint that it is something that has been a necessary part of the high school for almost 100 years now. I very strongly feel like B is our best option because I just don't think A goes far enough. I think we address the space issues that we've talked about, both current and projected, as best we can do, and it takes a big chunk out of this list. When it comes time to look at the average score, David, yes, I agree. If something falls below the line and there's some money there, absolutely. If we feel like that, as an administration, and the board, as whoever that is making the decision at the time, if that's $500,000 and it's available, yes, absolutely. Use it, especially if it's a safety and ADA or accessibility related issue. So if I was to say right now where I would be leaning very strongly to option B because it does more than just the short term. I think it's more long term the better fit.
I agree with Steve. And I think that making a bigger middle school really, eventually these same elementary kids are going to go to Exon. So you're still going to be needing space. And to me, just fixing a couple of the elementary schools, those same huge classes are going to start moving up. So to me, it makes more sense to, to look further into the future. As far as that's concerned, personally, I get why some people feel that the 6th and 7th and 8th should be separated. However, to me personally, it's not that big of a deal because once they get into high school, just a couple years later, they're all going to be mixed together anyway. My freshman has classes with juniors and seniors. I mean, so why not prepare them for that? They're not going to go through life in a 6th grade bubble. So why not start preparing them to deal with other opinions, other ages, whatever you want to call it. And I get on an educational level, they're all different, so to his point, at some, yes, maybe for the educational point, but then giving them the opportunity to participate with other people for electives and what have you. So that's my personal opinion on that. To me, I kind of look at it as preparing them more for life as the graduate. What does a graduate look like? Well, a graduate is not just going to be with the 6th grade class for the rest of his life. So why not prepare him to deal with other issues?
Can I just want to share one other perspective on the middle school issue. John mentioned earlier and I think it's important, we heard a lot from the community about the idea of one less transition and how you go to Steger and you just start to get to know a kid and then you're transitioning them to whole nother set of people. For kids with special needs and parents of kids with special needs, I cannot tell you, and I'm emotional about this because I cannot tell you, I've had 2 of them. And the beautiful thing about elementary school is it's a challenge. It's always a challenge to find the right people and the right techniques and what's going to work for that kid. You find that person, and in the elementary school, or the practice, or all of it, and in the elementary school, well, thank goodness, Mrs. Easter can walk down the hall to Mrs. Henrich and say, okay, I've got this kid, what worked for you, what worked for you. When they go to 6th grade, you can advocate and try to make those connections happen and try to facilitate that flow of information, but it does not happen as naturally, as easily, if at all. It just doesn't. And so basically 6th grade tends to be a year of just trying to catch back up to where you were. And then you're doing all over again in 7th and 8th, and that's just 2 years. So the idea of the kids who, whether they have IEPs, 504s, or they just struggle with whatever, finding that team and getting that team in place for them in 6th grade and having it be there for them for 2 more years before they jump into high school again, you guys, as a parent who has been through this, I really want to, I feel that's very important.
Well, and just emotionally for those kids too, it's so stressful.
And their parents.
Well, absolutely, but
Yeah.
for the kids, it's
Yeah.
just such a stressful time. To
It
take
is.
that transition away, I think
It
is
is.
huge.
It is. So I had a lot of notes about things that have already been said, but that's one that hadn't been said, and I just wanted to make sure that I shared that. Other thoughts? In terms of, anybody else want to share, and don't mean to put you on the spot, but in terms of where you're leaning for option A, 1, 2, none of the above, something different.
I like option B. I think it makes more sense to have that cohesive middle school. I like the equity of giving North Webster their own elementary school. I think the value of being able to walk to school is huge, and that they haven't had that in however many years is not right. So I think it's a good opportunity to correct that.
I agree. I think option B rights some wrongs there, but I also like the idea of the 6th through 8th grade middle school. I like that I've heard a little bit more than I was able to read ahead of time about safety and security, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I feel like this whole process, I feel like we're very well informed coming into this meeting, and I feel like I appreciate that this certainly was not a predetermined outcome, and I really value the creativity of the options that came to us, even from the very beginning. There were some really outside the box proposals, so I appreciate that. Couple of other things, I appreciated the comment that somebody said this isn't a community vote, but we don't want to be out of touch with the community, and the reassurance that we are not. Neither of these is out of touch with what our community wants. And then, we talked a lot about enrollment projections, particularly in the beginning, but as you emphasized and others, we're really not talking about what we think is going to happen based on kids born in the future. We're really talking about issues we know we have now and for the next few years. The other piece of it, though, is that we are in such a much better position financially thanks to Bruce and his team and others, that we have the ability to do this without asking for taxpayers to increase their taxes. I'm not saying it won't have some impact on them in the future, but it's not a tax rate increase at this time. And so to me, it seems like a no-brainer. I support option 2 as well.
And I hope that people will realize when you talk about the space issues that having the crowded and the modulars isn't just an inconvenience, it's a security issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, you can get by and kids still learn and that's all great, but it's not a safe place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Or as safe as it can be, at least.
I would ask, I understand that people don't want the taxes. I would ask to think of the kids. Are the kids not worth? That's for me personally, that's always been, because my kids don't go in the school district, somehow something has to get paid for, and it's usually through taxes. So are the children not worth having, paying for?
Yeah.
That's just the way I look at it.
All right.
Well, we'll come back then on January 14th, where you'll at that time vote, and we'll have ballot language there for you guys to decide upon.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Remember, we changed this, that it's got to be related to the topic that you about.
Yeah. Okay, we have our opportunity now for public comments. We welcome, I'm not going to read this to you, I'm just going to say, please keep the 3 minutes, tell us where you're from, and please keep it related to the discussion today, as opposed to whatever else might be on your mind, which is normally how we do things. So, but anyone like to make a public comment? Mr. Smith.
That's a pretty thick
3 minutes,
John,
buddy.
do we have a large clock we can put up here?
Given these 3 minutes, there's one letter on each page.
Hang on a second, Emerson, I'm going to start the timer.
My name is Emerson Smith, 1560 Euclid Avenue, Webster Groves, Missouri. First of all, I want to thank the board for having such a comprehensive package of information to share that you can see all issues. I did review all of the options, and I think option B, that would be my selection as well, to satisfy the needs of the district. I believe the decision to go option B is future thinking. It's taking care of a lot of problems that we've seen in the past that we tried to correct, but we couldn't because of funding. We're in a position where it's now the best time to do it. We can sit here and continue to question ourselves. What happens if this? What happens if this? We can make the best decision at this time, what we have now. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now, somebody will question, why did they do that? But, we're at the here and now. So I just want to congratulate this board for having the forethought of moving forward with this. One thing that I like to bring, which is the environment. Environment of kids is very important, but the environment of our school teachers, they have really sacrificed a lot within the last 10, 15 years. Lunchrooms taken away from class sizes, getting smaller, transferring closets to classrooms, that's not right. And then we anticipate and expect them to teach our kids to the best of their ability. Environment is very, very important. So I want to, once again, congratulate this board for moving forward with this, and you have my complete support. Thank you.
We'll take you up on that, buddy.
You've got another minute and 10 seconds.
Any other public comments? All right, we do have a consent agenda.
I would move that we approve consent agenda items 4.02 and 4.03.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Motion for adjournment?
Second.
All those in favor?
Not too bad, 11:45.
Anyone opposed?
I want to thank